Cool, there we are. Alrighty, and we're live. I'm joined today with Analytical Chick, and if he's available later, Bold Like a Leopard will be joining us. He's just busy at the moment, and we're going to be discussing military warfare today. I mean, personally, for me, I actually got into it when I was a little kid. It started off because I was interested in ancient civilizations like Greece and Rome, and then from there, I started learning about the sort of military tactics that they used. So I really got into it from an early age, and then once I found the Spartans, the warrior culture, before the movie 300 came out and before it was cool, I really took an interest in there. And then from there, it just kind of developed, and I would say most of my focus has been on ancient warfare, and then also more modern day, like World War I, World War II, trench warfare has always been interesting to me. So that's kind of where I started with. What about you?
Well, I'm a tomboy, so I guess I'm probably not as much into it as that, but I mean, I was in the army, and I definitely, like, when I'm looking at history now, I'm more minded towards, like, oh, the militaries did this.
So you were in the military for the U.S. forces, eh? Like regular forces or reserves?
I was in the army. I had a shoulder injury, though.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And then eventually healed, but after I got out.
Oh, well, that kind of sucks, but understandable. I mean, they don't need, if you can't fire the gun or something, because that's probably a lot of pressure right into your shoulder, eh?
I mean, there's a lot of other things, like I couldn't do push-ups.
Oh, you know what? I didn't even think about that sort of thing even.
Yeah!
Yeah, that's true too. I mean, I've never had any major shoulder injuries, but even the tiny ones, it makes it impossible. So, Jesus, that must have been a pain.
I had trouble carrying stuff. Like, even it eventually healed, but even, like, after I got out, there was one day when I was, like, just carrying groceries, I started, like, tears running down my eyes because, I was in so much pain.
Jesus.
So.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Was that an injury because of your time in the army?
Yeah, they made me do diamond push-ups, which is actually illegal in the U.S. Army. And I ended up, like, locking out my shoulder, and they said I was being a big baby, but, I mean, like I said, I couldn't, I was having issues even after I got out.
Did they even, like, give you any severance for that?
Huh?
Did you even get any severance for that, at least?
No.
Oh, wow. Lovely. That's just another story we hear about them not taking care of people who serve, eh?
Well, I mean, I saved money up while I was in, but, so, I mean, I was, like, in a little bit of decent shape, and I got an office job after I got out. You know.
Fair enough. So, in terms otherwise, oh, sorry, I was getting some feedback in my headset for a second. So, otherwise, like aside for actually serving in the military, you've taken an interest in sort of the military history of America and things. I take it, eh?
Yeah, I mean, after I hadn't really, like, planned on joining the army. I kind of did it spur of the moment because, like, for financial reasons mostly. Everyone's like, why would a girl join? But then afterwards, I had been exposed to it. So when I would hear histories of stuff, I'd be like, okay, well, what was the army doing? And that sort of thing. Definitely, I know, one of the big ones being Jewish is there was the 6-Day War where Israel had to fight off, I think something like 8 nations, maybe?
It was at least 5 or 6.
Yeah. It's a lot. So that kind of intrigues me as someone who had been in the military.
One thing that I found was about the 6-Day War is something people tend to leave out when talking about modern day history with Israel and Palestine, was the fact that in that moment, Israel was in a fight for its life. And only, actually, I would say the only thing that saved them was the fact that they made a preemptive strike against Egypt and destroyed their airfields. So they took air superiority. But whenever anybody's talking about the history of Israel, they tend to leave out that in that war, that was literally a war of survival for Israel. They would have been wiped off the map had they lost.
Yeah, I mean, that there's a lot of things that get left out on Israel history.
I'm sure you could. Oh, go ahead.
Well, it's similar to like right now with South Africa. They're trying to act like the whites stole the land when what actually happened was the whites came in and took land that the people who lived there couldn't farm because they didn't know how to farm it. It was like swampy and rocky and and they didn't know how to irrigate it, so on and so forth. That's the same thing with Israel. Like the Arabs couldn't figure out how to desalinate the water and irrigate and all of these things. So a lot of that land was not inhabited. And this is something that people don't look at. Like, same thing with the US. Like, people talk about, like, oh, we stole the land from the natives. Like, no, we didn't. The United States was basically empty, and the few Native Americans that there were, we gave them the reservations. Like, those are 3 examples of where they're, like, acting like people stole land when they really didn't.
Well, the thing I don't like about when people start going on talking about stolen land is if you look back at history, almost any piece of land could be considered stolen land then. I mean, the modern day,
Exactly.
if we look at England, the Anglo-Saxons that came and they replaced the Romans who were there. So, and the Romans replaced the Celts who were in there. It's just the whole history is based on human history is based on nations replacing each other, whether that's through warring and conquest, or whether that's just through more of settling, like what happened in America.
Yeah, but I mean, one of the huge points that I make is some of these lands were basically abandoned. Nobody was on them, so they weren't even conquered. Like the U.S. was mostly empty. The U.S. wasn't conquered. I mean, there were parts that were conquered, but they act like the U.S. was as full as it is now, and that we killed millions and millions of people. And even 100 years ago, there were only 30 million people in the U.S., and that was after we started settling people from Europe. So,
and people like to act like one thing I've noticed, people have painted an image that life in America before the colonials showed up was all perfect, when in fact, if you look at tribes such as the Algonquins, they were actually quite warmongering. Actually, a lot of people hated the Aztecs for that very reason, just because they were constantly warring with their neighbors and then committing atrocious acts. I remember there was a story a while ago about from way back in the day. There was I think it was a Mayan princess who was supposed to marry an Aztec prince. And when her parents came for the reception, it turns out that they had killed her. So it's not like this was, it's not like we were coming from a society like the native culture was all like beautiful and peaceful. It was actually quite warmongering before the colonials showed up.
right. Exactly. Getting back to war, the topic of the discussion.
Mm-hmm. Very true. So anyway, yes, we can go back talking about the a little bit more about the 6-Day War, because that was the fight of survival for Israel, but that is left out because Israel at the time was very tiny. I think it was only 6 meters long, and then the West Bank and Gaza that ended up getting annexed from there was during that time. But ever since then, one of the problems is that we've just seen a buildup of terrorist organizations that are just prepared to go to war with the Israel people and even their own people, the Palestinian people.
Well, what's going on with that is the so-called Palestinians are people that are moving in from the Arab nations and saying, oh, no, our family was always here. And most of the time it's a lie. Like, even their leader, Yasser Arafat, was from Egypt.
Was he actually? I didn't hear about that.
Oh, yeah! Yasser Arafat was born in Egypt.
Oh, Jesus. Oh,
He's the
man.
one that even created, I don't know if you've noticed, they have this black on white fishnet pattern that they use. It's called the Fatah pattern.
Yeah.
It was like my second video. I did a video about the Fatah pattern. And that's like a symbol of like Hamas and Fatah and these movements and Yasser Arafat. They were already using it, but Yasser Arafat made that his symbol. And then later on, the communists who were trying to make a communist Arab area, they started doing the symbol with a red fishnet on white.
So were those the Baathists you're talking about?
I think so.
Yeah, okay, yeah, the Arab Socialist Party or something, the 101 state. Yeah, I remember that. I remember hearing about them.
Yeah.
Damn, I did not actually know that. That's actually kind of cool. But in terms of, actually, maybe this might be a little bit of an older topic, but one thing, like, not that old, sorry, it's like going back a couple months, but for a while there, we were hearing a lot that was going on about the standoff between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump, and a lot of people were theorizing about nuclear war. There was actually a fear for them. What were your thoughts on that? Do you actually think there would be a nuclear war between North Korea and America?
No. No, I didn't believe that. I don't think they have the technology to reach the United States, if I'm not mistaken.
I know they've had some successful tests, but other than that, everything I've heard has just been propaganda coming out of North Korea saying, oh, we could hit the mainland United States.
Give them the coordinates for Berkeley. I'm totally okay with Jesse Aragon getting hit. Totally okay with it, then.
Jesus Christ. I don't think I can really blame you considering everything that's gone on in that city over just 2017 alone. Jesus Christ. But we were definitely seeing a standoff of some sort, and we haven't seen this sort of type in a while. So if we were to go to war with if America was to go to war with North Korea, then how long do you think they could actually hold out? Because they seem like they have they're pretty military dictatorship, so then maybe they have the skill, but at the same time they seem like they're using 1950s type Russian technology.
I mean, I don't think North Korea, I think, yeah, you're right. I think they're stuck in like the 19-something. I mean, he shows off a lot, but I mean, that doesn't mean anything. I mean, we basically, there's a reason why everybody asks us to fight their war for them. We have the best military.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's actually one thing that I've kind of raged about a little bit when it's come to NATO allies. Because a while ago, I don't remember how long ago it was, but Trump pretty much came out and he said, our allies, they can't expect America just to go to bat for them. And I actually, even though my country, number one, would be pretty much left defenseless if that was to happen, I actually agreed with him on that because ever since, I guess it's about World War II, when America really reached its military peak, all of the allies have pretty much reduced their military spending and have relied on American technology and the long reach of America in order to keep themselves safe.
Yeah, I mean, they expect us to go to war for them. They expect us to give them handouts. And then they expect us to take all of their, cast-offs in the forms of, I mean, we're taking in all these people from all these other countries who, are not our citizens. We're expected to take care of them. We give foreign aid to, everybody. I don't think any other country, does Canada give out foreign aid to countries?
We do, but even so, it's not remotely close to what you give out.
I mean, and we give foreign aid out to countries that are basically our enemies. What? What?
I never understood the weapons deal that Trump signed. It was a few months, maybe last summer into his
Yeah,
presidency.
I'm not happy about that. There are things that he's done that I'm not happy about.
I can
Honestly.
imagine.
I mean, I still think he's the best president we've ever had because I know that like Obama and Bush and Clinton and Bush and Reagan, like all of them did stuff that didn't really, we didn't really have the internet this well developed to be able to find out what they were doing behind our back. We had to rely on the media, and the media never had our interests at heart, we now know. But like we didn't even know that. Like I grew up thinking like, well, if anybody does anything bad, the media's gonna come and let us know and we can all get met. Oh, come on. Now I know the truth. I know how the media is basically in the pocket of all the corrupt.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you on that. And actually, I've said before that I have people in my life that are close to me who work in the mainstream media, and even after I've paid attention to everything, I agree with you on that. They've really they really don't present stuff in a good light. I mean, this can go back all the way to Vietnam because there was a lot of propaganda going around during the Vietnam War, where the media was just not presenting the full side, and yeah, literally doing exactly what you were talking about. They were just playing into the pockets of whoever was in charge.
Well, I mean, it's most obvious when it comes to all the stuff that was going on with the riots. The black groups that rioted in like 2015.
Oh
And the
yes,
media
hands up,
kept
don't shoot.
stoking the fires. I mean, and look at now, the media is like stoking this gun control stuff.
Like right off the bat, yeah, like it seemed like one of the first things that happened after the shooting that happened was just immediately jumping on the gun control issue. And I've noticed that too. It's almost the first thing that comes out. Sometimes it's in the headlines. It's like a shooting happens. When are we going to talk about gun control?
Like, yeah, exactly.
Ugh, drives me insane. But anyway, yeah. I guess we get back on topic a little bit. We got off a
Yeah.
little bit off on
Where's
there.
everybody? We need more people.
I know you sent out a message on the Discord, eh?
Yeah.
Hopefully somebody will respond. Starscream should be in very soon. I think, yeah, it should be in the next few minutes, I think. But anyway, if maybe if we go back and talk a little bit about military history a little bit, because I've always been interested in World War One battle tactics. Just the fact that the way it was done, the fact we had a long line of trenches, just interconnecting trenches. But what really fascinated me is that somehow the generals convinced their troops just to get up and run towards a solid mass of guns while thousands around them would be shot dead.
Yeah, military is all about strategy. It's not really about like the people on the ground doing, following the general's orders. It's about having good strategy. You can't win a war without good strategy.
It seems to me mostly the strategies that have been the most useful have been this. It's always deception, of course. Deception's always the best strategy to use whenever you're fighting a war. But in a situation, well, it's just so many examples. I mean, one of the best one, for example, I guess we're jumping around a little bit, but one of the best ones was Alexander the Great, because I think one of the best use of deception was one time he was caught on the other side of the river, and he spent like 2 weeks watching his army up and down the river until the enemy army got used to him and just camped on the other side, and then they end up when finally the army got used to them just marching up and down the river, they crossed over, were able to take them by surprise. So deception's always an important key whenever we're talking about war. But tactics, definitely, like the overall strategy, what's going on in the actual battle itself, definitely. In modern day times, though, wars kind of changed because now we're facing more, it seems like, smaller squad on squad combat in a more urban environment.
Yeah. I mean, we have higher technology, but we're using like drone strikes and stuff.
Well, we're completely getting away from the conventional warfare because we're starting to look even more into getting even automaton soldiers onto the ground now. That's I've been watching a couple documentaries about this type of soldiers that they're working on with that, and it literally looks like it's something coming out of the Terminator movies. There's just these humanoid robots that are packed with thousands of rounds of bullets, and you know that are just packed with thousands of rounds of bullets and can take out like a whole host of humans no problem. So like that's always been my concern. Actually, I've been worried that if we were ever to actually reach an apocalypse, we'd end up having some sort of war with AI, with automatons.
Do you mean like these things develop a mind of their own and start going after us too?
Yeah, literally. Like I am talking more about sort of a
That
Terminator
does
type
sound like
future.
something out of a movie.
It does, but then there's just like been some weird things that have happened with robots before, like just how they can get corrupted. But it just when you have just cold calculation, I mean, one thing I've been thinking about in terms of this, if automatons were in control of, say, our weapons, was if we were to take into what was going on recently with when people were wondering about nuclear arms getting used by North Korea and America, if it was a robot, it would probably just calculate that that a preemptive strike would be the best chance of survival. But when we're dealing with humans, we know what the consequences of doing something that with that would be. So this is what I think it would be mostly, is that the robots don't take human lives into account. Eventually, as robots get more better and more centralized, they would start developing a mind of their own.
Yeah, it's funny that like people will jump on board with stuff like that, and a lot of people, well, everything is about people's feelings nowadays. So in actuality, like you said, it might be more lives, and which, I mean, the world is overpopulated, so whatever. They keep saying like people should stop having babies, but at the same time, like, well, they're telling white people to stop having babies, but at the same time, they're saying like that others should flourish.
Yeah, it's yeah, that's true. I've been seeing a lot of articles regarding that lately. But then I guess I've wondered, when in terms of that, if robots themselves are going to be considered like a life form. There's been a couple of articles of people who've been, like, I'm sure you've seen, the people talking about the sex bots and stuff that they're trying to come out with. But people are now actually talking about marrying them.
The That's big on the MGTOW scene. The guys are like, yeah, we don't need women anymore.
Wow, that's a little sad if they think that they can go around like, really? You're just going to have a sex bot?
I mean, personally, like, I think it's sad that, like, in general, we've gotten away from families. And, I'm sorry. We've gotten away from having families, and so that's a lot of the problem with that. They've tricked the men into thinking like, oh, you don't want to settle down with a woman, you just want to sleep around. And they've basically told women not to want,
not to want to have to be with men, but go out, you don't need a man to have a baby,
yeah,
or something like that.
Gotta have a career, you don't want to have a family, marriage, like, bogs you down. And men get angry about this, saying like, oh, the women don't want families anymore. But a lot of men are also being tricked by the left into not wanting families. So, I mean, that's a different kind of a war. That's a war on families.
More of a culture war that we're going through right now.
Exactly. There's definitely a culture war going on right now, without a doubt.
I can't really. That's actually when we're talking about the family values issue with this culture war that's going on. That's an interesting one because that's one that's been particularly targeted and torn down. The only reason I can really think of is because it seems to me that the family is the big thing that stands in the way of state control. Like,
Yep.
as far as I can tell, it's just that having your family keeps you organized. But without it's sort of Stefan Molyneux, I guess he's kind of talked about that a lot about how families break up, they rely more on the state. So I wondered if this is just like, do you really think that something like that is just a propaganda tool being used for more state control? Like, is that actually what we're dealing with right now, or are we just dealing with a bunch of people who have gone so far off course?
I mean, I don't know who has planned it exactly because everybody has different people that they say have planned it. But definitely it seems like the idea is, I mean, it's also a war on the so-called right. They always say like, oh, these Republicans, this in the States, like everything is, like if you support the Second Amendment, you're like one of those religious.
Radicals?
Yeah, I'm breaking up. Can you
You
hear
are?
it? I hear myself echoing. Let
I
me.
hear you fine.
Oh, okay. Oh, now I don't hear it.
Hmm.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So definitely, they're trying to break up the basic society.
Hmm. Now, that's actually what that there's something about that I've always been interested in because, a few years ago, I found myself a little farther down the left wing path. And whenever
Right.
I found that nobody actually that I spoke to, for the most part, like the average person to person, whatever in the workplace, they never seem to have this with malicious intent, though. That's the one thing that's always confused me about it, is they always seem, whenever, for instance, when they talk about maybe not having families and things like that, I guess you could say it's for selfish reasons, but it's always they kind of wanted to be able to do their own thing in their life and not be, I guess, bogged down by a family. So it's not actually that they had it seems that they have malicious intentions against people with family. It's just that for them they felt it wasn't really they didn't feel it was for them. But I guess maybe
But
that's the
we're
go ahead.
being tricked by like the media. Like the media tells women over and over again. I heard growing up from like my teachers, my mom, everybody. Oh well, you got to have a career. You got to do this, this, this. Got to have a career. This is more important than you know this is more important than having a family. So the thing is, the individuals who are making these decisions, they are going along with it, but they're not the ones launching the culture war.
Yeah, that's you're saying that one's actually coming from the more political wings, eh?
Right.
I can actually believe that when you do put it in that regards, because not long ago there was a law that was passed where I live, which it ended up putting trans children, it ended up putting transgenderism as something that had to be protected. And in fact, there's been some fears that that parents could have their children taken away if they were to refuse that, like if they were to not get their child the support they were looking for, or if
This
they
happened
were.
already in the States.
Did it?
There was a case in Ohio where a 17-year-old wanted to be trans and the parents said no. And I mean, if you think about it, they could have done it in another year. They ran off to live with their grandparents and got a guardian ad litem to sue their parents. Just like,
Wow.
if you need to transition, like, just wait a year, you'll be 18.
Well, now they're even talking that apparently Caitlyn Jenner is starting to regret this. Now, this could just be another bid from attention from, Bruce, Caitlyn, whatever you want to call him. But
Well, yeah, Blair White did an episode about this on her channel, though. His channel. And Blair White said, like, this is one of the reasons why, even though I myself am trans, I don't agree with children being encouraged to transition because, how many like 18-year-olds get like tattoos that they end up regretting. And this is a little bit bigger of a deal if you have, your winky chopped off.
Definitely. And considering how they say such a high amount of them actually feel that if you don't do anything about it, if you don't get any surgery, any hormone blockers, eventually down the line, within a year or two, they actually say that they're happy that they didn't transition. They're glad. Most people seems to go through some sort of confusion there. It just seems to be a part of growing up, but now they've co-opted to turn it into some sort of I don't know, yeah, political tool or political weapon of some sort.
I definitely think that it should be pushed to like an older age because, I mean, I pretty much stand by most of my decisions that I made in my younger years, most of them. But I know people around me made some asinine decisions, and I think most people don't stand by their decisions from when they were like 18 years old.
No, I think you're right on that. There was definitely some decisions I made when I was 18 years old that were kind of dumb now that I think back about them. But yeah. But yeah, that's just I've noticed that too that there's just been a push to try and get transgenderism more accepted, more yeah, I don't know, accepted, and it's always been disturbing, especially when in terms we're speaking about kids. But then even marriage,
if adults want to do this, it's like whatever. But glorifying this as cool, like Bruce Jenner was part of that whole Kardashian thing, isn't he? Like the Kardashians. See, I'm Generation X, so I didn't really follow this Kardashian thing that much, and I know like the millennials, this is like everything for them.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, I've got to deal with it all the time just because everybody that like most of the people in my high school at the time were just all over Kim Kardashian and what she was doing. Yeah.
Yeah, at one point I was following, I have an estranged niece that I was actually speaking to briefly, and I was talking to her like the very end of her senior year of high school, and like when she first got out, and to make it not look weird if her parents, because I don't talk to my sister anymore, if they ever was like looking through her Twitter, I also followed a few of her friends, so it would look like I was like somebody from her high school. And and this was when I very first started using Twitter, all of these people, like all they ever did was tweet about the Kardashians, this Kardashian, and and it's just like, oh my gosh.
It's all just like 5-minute sound bites. That's all it is. It's a waste of fucking time. I never bought into the Kardashians or any of that stupid pop media stuff. I avoided TMZ like the goddamn plague.
Well, and I'm older, so like that's not my generation. So it's like, I don't know what would be the equivalent for my generation, but maybe nothing, because we didn't really have the internet the way that we do now. But yeah, people were still into celebrities. I wasn't, but people were.
But yeah, you never had anybody quite like that, like dealing with this sort of ridiculousness on that level. I mean, I would say that the Kardashians brought the bar up to a whole new level. Whoever comes in after them is going to have to pull a lot of shenanigans in order just to be recognized after what they've done.
Yeah, I think Paris Hilton was probably similar in the last like wave before that. But that was like after I was out of high school.
Yeah, well, Paris Hilton was she created Kim Kardashian. Actually, they were friends before, and then actually,
I think I knew that.
I heard actually somewhere that apparently it was Paris Hilton who gave Kim Kardashian the idea of putting out a sex tape, telling her it'd make her famous. What do you even say to that?
I'm not surprised. I'm betting that that's something that someone just said as, oh, I bet, and then like it grew a life of its own. But I still wouldn't be surprised if that's actually what happened, because isn't that what Paris Hilton did to get famous.
Yep, that's exactly what she did to get famous. So it wouldn't surprise me either. But
I don't think that. I think we're at the point though where that maybe wouldn't work anymore. I don't know. Maybe it still would.
I think you're right. Nowadays, anybody with a video camera can really put themselves online. So you might be right. We might be past that age where sex tapes and stuff actually make you famous, which, in my opinion, is a good thing. At least because I thought it was ridiculous that we even glorified these people for something so stupid.
Yeah, I mean, our culture is just. I look back at the kind of culture they had in the 40s, and like, I lived growing up in the 80s, but now I'm like, kind of wasn't a bad idea. Call me old.
No, I think it was a good thing. You missed a lot of fucked up shit. I think it was right around the 90s when they started so right as I was getting into school, I think when they started a lot of indoctrination that we see today. Cuz I think back to some of the
I mean,
things
there
that were
was
cool.
some of it for my generation, but it really like took off right behind me. They tried it on my generation. We pushed back.
And then from us, they just hit us right from the beginning. So a lot of the shit we just thought was, the way it was. I mean, for me, I remember.
Yeah, like I recently saw something where a millennial was like, "Stop pretending that work satisfaction is a millennial thing," and I'm like, kind of is. Like they started with my generation where our teachers constantly told us like, you need to have like a great job that you love, and then like that really took off with the millennials. But the thing is, when I like entered the workforce as like 20 something or whatever, and I wanted to make a difference, I wanted this, I wanted that, it didn't take long before I kind of realized like I just need to pay the bills. Like, yeah, it's great if you can get a job you love, but I need to pay the bills.
In the end, yeah, that's what really counts. I mean, I've worked jobs that I've hated, but for that very reason, you had to pay the bills. I spent 5 years working in one of those shitty fast food restaurants, and it sucked, but it was all part of the stepping stones. Actually, I would say that was a good experience for me because I worked my 5 years in there. I did my normal time, spent a little bit of time as a supervisor. Then I got to step up to a better job from there because of my work experience. And that's when I ended up working for the manufacturing job at the microbiology clinic. And so it was a good stepping stone. And that's kind of actually, in a way, what taught me about what responsibility and capitalism really was about. It's all about building yourself up. So it was a good learning experience for me in that regards because, yeah, I definitely would say when I first got in the workforce when I was like 16, a little bit more about definitely my job should be satisfying to me. I had that put in my head.
Yeah, and I mean, and you look at like my father's generation, that just wasn't even on the table. They went to high school, they graduated high school, and they went to manufacturing jobs. And, only kids who had rich parents went to college. I mean, maybe some of the really, really brightest bucked up and found a way to go, but it, like, when I was growing up and when you were growing up, like, we were all told everybody has to go to college, and if you don't go to college, you're going to work at McDonald's. And my dad's generation wasn't told that. But then now they're turning around saying, oh, we have to bring all these immigrants in because nobody wants these jobs like, carpentry and plumbing. And it's like, you told us not to do that stuff. You people, like all of our teachers told us down our throats like that the only way was college. And
yeah,
the teachers collectively kind of control society on media.
How so?
I mean, I heard it over and over again, like repeatedly, like if you don't go to college, it was in all the movies, it was on all the, I mean, and even now, like, and there was also this assumption that your parents were rich. and you get 11th grade and your parents are like, what? Savings account for your college? Like, no. But all the commercials and all the movies showed everybody's parents paying for their college. So you just assumed your parents had some savings account for building up for your college. Because that's what all the you know?
Yeah, that's true. I got that narrative all the time, especially in high school, right? As you're getting ready to go into college, you're getting that sort of narrative pushed to me. For my case, my parents didn't have a school fund set up for me, but I had some luck though, because they were willing to help me out on my way to college if I wanted to do that, which they've been nice to do. But you're absolutely right that they push this narrative that, you know, it's fine, just go off to college. But then now, because of it, we have all these degrees and all these courses that are completely worthless in the real world. And going back to what you were just saying about the immigration thing, one thing that I've found out too is they say, well, you know, it's all these shitty jobs that no one wants to do. Well, one thing, if we were to actually bring in less immigrant workers about that, is that those sort of jobs would have to start offering more in order to get people to do the work, which means actually your labor is costing more. So it actually benefits the citizen in the long run.
Right. I mean, yeah, and that's the thing is like, and Trump has pushed this narrative a little bit, but like, bring back apprenticeships. Bring back, like, instead of telling everyone to get a 4-year degree in like accounting and have them learn a whole bunch of, help people to get a 2-year degree and have bigger accounting firms like bring them in and train them anyway.
That's not a bad idea.
A 2-year degree.
And even some,
I mean, but the thing, we have to get the employers. So to me, one of the things that I would suggest for our politicians to do is like find some way to give tax breaks to companies. Like, first off, we gotta like pinch the H-1 visa crap. And we have to close our borders, and I mean, if they really, the problem is our politicians don't want to do that because they're getting bought off by foreign lobbies.
There's a lot of foreign money that I've noticed lately that's coming in.
I'm not talking about APAC.
Oh, cool. Bold's gonna jump in.
We're way off topic, but
yeah, we were getting a little bit pretty far off topic. But Bold,
we went from like war and civilizational war.
Yeah, somehow it went from culture war, then it got into about the teachers. Oh well, that's okay. Tell you what.
The teachers are at war with the students. We just don't know.
Well, one thing I've wondered is if just the teachers have, if they're just find themselves, like if they're actually it's actually the school boards that are causing that problem. Hey, what's going on, Bold?
Hello, I'm sorry for, I had a different stream to do, but I'm here. Just gonna listen for a little bit to catch up.
Well, we actually got a little bit off topic while we were waiting.
You're here with us. Yay!
What's up? This is the first time I'm on actual stream with AC.
Oh, really? That's the first time?
Yeah, I think yeah, we've been on Discord. I think I found her channel about 2 months ago, but yeah, this is the first time we've ever streamed.
And then I'm a matchmaker.
But yeah.
And then I'm a matchmaker. Well, anyway, we should probably we ended up getting completely off topic. I think by the time you jumped in, we were talking about teachers actually. But I started off at the beginning. I was saying that my interest in military warfare came from I first got into it because I got into.
Do you ever stream with other people like this?
Sorry. Hello?
AC? I can hear you moving. I can't hear you talking.
Yeah, we can hear something.
I think she asked you if you've done streams like this before.
I've been on what's his name, Maddodge's stream a bunch of times, but other than that, not much.
Maddodge does some crazy long streams. I've seen some that have gone as long as like 8 hours or something.
Yeah, I've been on a couple times.
Have you ever been on for the full 8?
No, I mean I I do have some time, but I don't know about 8 hours to do a stream.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. So anyway, yeah, when we started off, I was just saying that my interest in military warfare happened to come from, and military history came from, I first got into ancient civilizations. And then from there, I learned it was Greek and Roman. And from there, I learned about their militaries. And my interest really came in once I learned about the Spartans back before they were cool. And, 300 came out with them with painted on abs. So ever since there, I've just been interested in all the tactics, the strategy, everything that goes into fighting and winning a battle. What about you? What's your interest in? Where'd your interest from military warfare span from?
Well, I mean, growing up, we had obviously. Let me see. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so obviously from the movies, of course, but I think when I started really learning about the war in Vietnam and some of the issues that were there with tunnel fighting and with the river boats and all the different elements that went into the U.S. effort there, which some of them might have been unnecessary because they weren't actually trying to win the war in a timely manner. That kind of piqued my interest because it's the war that, until Afghanistan, was the longest one in U.S. history. And, there were obviously some, you think about it, there have been more negative effects from the war on the in Vietnam on the veterans than we tend to hear about from Korea or World War II. So I think that's really the war that really got me interested in military history. I've probably studied a lot of other wars that are less known. For example, the Uganda-Tanzania War, which probably nobody really cares about because it took a couple months. But I think that military history, there are certain ways to get a little too into the weeds about it, but I think everybody should be at least conscious of it because, unfortunately, your country can end up in one, and you could end up, carrying a rifle or something.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true, especially in certain countries around the world. I mean, if you're living in the Middle East right now, what's that?
I'm gonna see what's going on with AC.
Fair enough. Yeah, she keeps popping up, but I'm not here. I can't hear anything from her.
What about me?
Yeah, we can't hear your audio, but we can hear something coming from your end.
Sorry, I just wasn't talking.
Oh.
Okay, now I can hear you now. Yeah, we just wanted to be sure you're still with us. Well, one thing
What's that?
I just wanted to be sure that you were still with us, like we.
Yeah, before I was just.
Fair enough. One thing I found interesting about the Vietnam War.
I just didn't have anything to say.
Oh, okay.
I think she might be on a delay too.
Delay?
Yeah, can you? Oh. Let's see how long it takes for her to react.
What's that?
Yeah, see, I think you're on a delay, AC.
No, I'm here. I'm just doing other stuff.
Alrighty. We're too obsessed with what she's doing right now.
Okay.
Well, anyway, one thing I found interesting about the Vietnam War was the fact that it was a change for both the sentiment in America, but also for the veterans, because for the sentiment in America, we never before had such an anti-war sentiment pop up during one of these, which definitely crippled the war effort. But on top of this was the first time it seemed in history where American veterans came home and they were actually treated like garbage. They were spit on and just treated as they called murderers. There's plenty of stories of these veterans talking about their experience after coming home from Vietnam. That was actually one thing that I always found interesting about the war, was just that completely change in sentiment there from everything that had happened in America's history.
Yeah, I think that when Vietnam became more of a political issue between counterculture and the prevailing government, that's really where that started to become, this backlash that ended up taking effect against the soldiers. And I'm assuming it's worse than it is today, because there are, for example, there was a professor who recently said similar things to that era regarding, troops from Afghanistan. This Marxist professor at Drexel University, he recently got fired. I think he might have gotten either fired or he resigned because of pressure. And yeah, I think one of the reasons is because the influence of academia became a lot stronger after the GI Bill, and also after it became more mainstream for Americans to go to college, and there was the draft waiver if you went to college, or if you were clerk. I think there was always the waiver if you were kind of a man of the cloth, like a religious clergyman. So the country became divided between those who were willing to go to war and didn't have an excuse for it, or not willing to go to war and didn't have an excuse for it, and the people who thought that the war was something for losers to do.
I think what it was is, as I understand it, I think the sentiment, like the feelings towards the war, were fine at the beginning, that they were okay with it. But then, as the stories came back and we started to hear about the casualties and they kept mounting, that's really when everything started to build up. But that was also due because America was fighting for the first time, was fighting a war they never had before. Like, this was one of the first time we really saw a lot of guerrilla tactics being used against a large static army like America's.
Well, what you're talking about in terms of the casualties, I think that there's a movie that recently came out that kind of misrepresents really the importance of what happened. They make it seem like the media was the heroes then, but there was government misinformation on the part of the Johnson administration, especially given, the Johnson administration was basically, their defense policy was run like a corporation by Robert McNamara, and they were really obsessed with kill counts and statistics and things like that, and the number of bombs dropped. So basically, the Pentagon Papers issue, where the data was leaked, at that time by hand. I think they found printed copies of the true data from the war that showed that a lot of the numbers were inflated, that in reality the enemy war effort, North Vietnam and the Viet Cong, wasn't really affected to the degree that was portrayed. And that's really where the trust began to erode, and you had the phrase credibility gap became important. Like there's a difference between how much what the government is saying and what you can really believe, and it just went downhill from there as the counterculture became stronger. And this was to blame for the U.S. government and the Johnson administration and the Army itself.
Now, did they in these papers, did they say why they inflated the casualty numbers? Because if I feel like this could only cause like a loss of morale amongst the American soldiers and the American populace. Did they explain why?
You mean the inflation?
Yeah, they were inflating the American casualties, you said, eh?
Well, the reason that they were inflating it was because all of these units, the Air Force units that were doing bombing sorties, and there were obviously the field units of the Marines and the infantry and the artillery units. They were given quotas for how many, especially body count quotas. So in order to, it was kind of a competition. So sometimes I believe they even started counting people who were obviously not combatants as part of the body count, and that's where you really get to the point where you realize that the goal was not really to win the war and to defeat communism in South Vietnam, or to defend freedom there. The goal was kind of to sustain this military machine over there, and that's why I consider the war to have been a failure, because they didn't start out with the intention of defeating North Vietnam in the most effective and timely manner possible.
Well, it definitely seemed from their rules of engagement that that was the case, because I knew that I'm trying to remember all as many as I can, but one of them for sure was that they weren't allowed to pursue in any way any Viet Cong troops that were escaping into neighboring Laos or Cambodia. And I think they were only allowed to target and destroy anti-aircraft guns that were confirmed to be active. So they couldn't even hit sites that, you know, where they thought it was there. So it seemed their rules of engagement would back up what you're saying so far, which is a very interesting. It's very interesting that was their whole point for the war, was just to extend it and not to win it. Especially because at this point it seemed that between the Korean War and the Vietnam War, that was supposed to be America and the West drawing its line against the Soviets and communism that was going on there. So that's a little interesting that they were just looking to extend it and not win the war.
Well, one of the flaws of the Vietnam War was that a lot of the officers at the beginning who were, you know, the experienced officers who were inserted there were Korean War officers. And in the Korean War, armored combat was very important, you know, tanks and APCs. And that's because Korea is a much drier and northerly climate than Vietnam. Whereas Vietnam is, you know, there's of course the pictures of the rice paddies, and there are mountainous regions. So, you know, these commanders, you know, veteran commanders, or, you know, ones that had been in the army for several years, they weren't used to having a war where, you know, there were like what you were alluding to with Laos. So it's not as if you had columns and infantry human waves like the Chinese and Korean, North Korean. Yeah, go ahead. What's that? AC?
We're not hearing you.
Yeah, there's some issue with her audio. Should I just keep going?
Yeah, for now, until we can get it, she jumps back in again.
Yeah, maybe can you try to reconnect AC? You know, yeah, I'm not hearing her.
Not at all.
I heard her for a second. Did you hear
her? Just, yeah, for like a split second. Okay,
so,
I think she's gonna jump back in.
So what I saw is that, you know, from all of the accounts that I've heard, was that the Korean War veteran commanders were ill prepared for really guerrilla warfare, like you were talking about. So that was a huge flaw of that of the beginning of that war. But as the war developed, some of the other factors that you alluded to also came into play. For example, the Ho Chi Minh Trail was, for a while, the U.S. wasn't really paying attention to how all of these guerrillas in Vietnam. And if you look at Vietnam, it's kind of like it's shaped kind of, you know, oblong, very, very oblong, you know, kind of like a thread for most of it. And, you know, there was no explanation for how all of these guerrillas way to the south of the DMZ, the demilitarized zone between the north and south, were getting resupplied. So eventually they realized that there was the Ho Chi Minh Trail going through Laos and Cambodia, and they had, I believe it was in 1968 or later, they had to embark on this long mission that included a major air campaign and other, you know, armed infantry campaign in Laos called I think it was Operation Linebacker, that they thought for a while had, you know, neutered the Ho Chi Minh Trail, but they never ended up completely, you know, getting a handle of how the North was able to resupply the Viet Cong. And that, in my opinion, their unwillingness to realize that the Vietnam War was, in the North Vietnamese minds, it was a total war. They were willing to give up as many lives as possible and make any sacrifice possible. It ended up costing more people than if the U.S. would have, for example, just invaded North Vietnam or something. And you know, that's kind of the strategic trade-off of it.
Jeez, wow, it's oof. Boy, it's a little hard to hear almost that the American government was willing to put so many lives at risk just for this reason. Wow, that's amazing. But ever since then, yeah, that was but that was also where we saw the change into guerrilla warfare. And I found that the last couple days I've been watching, just decided while preparing for the live stream, I was watching a couple different documentaries. And this was actually, it seemed to me, a tactic that was being used as in the Iraq War. As I looked into certain battles, such as the Battle of Fallujah, that it seemed that that was the main tactics that were being used by the insurgents there at the time, was to strike the American soldiers, quit briefly, retreat, fall back to a better fortified positions, keep attacking them there. And this was a tactic first developed during, well, I don't know if you want to say first developed, but professionalized by the Viet Cong. And ever since, so what do you think when we're discussing guerrilla warfare and you're dealing with an enemy that is dealing with camouflage and stealth? What do you think is the best defense for when we're dealing with guerrillas?
Look, guerrilla warfare is kind of a term that is taken to mean, the insurgents, that it's asymmetric. You're not talking about two columns of soldiers fighting together. Like for example, the most un-guerrilla warfare type of war, if I can say it that way, was World War I, where you just had this trench warfare was ridiculous. So really, some of the more effective counter-guerrilla wars that have been fought, for example, was the Malayan Emergency, which in the United States almost nobody knows about. I don't know if you guys know about it in Canada, but that was a war between British troops and basically these Malayan communists in what was, this was before Malaysia was a country. And basically they treated it as a police action. So in urban areas, you would arrest these guerrillas and basically treat them as criminals. And in the country, they basically went on patrols and they used guerrilla tactics against the guerrillas. And that's where the Green Berets came in Vietnam. They were using guerrilla tactics against the guerrillas, having these small patrols of people who were able to adapt to life, basically living rough for weeks and even months on end. And that was successful in Malaysia because that was most of the guerrillas were minority Chinese. They weren't Malayan ethnic people. But in Vietnam, because of the lack of pro-war sentiment at a certain point, it did run out as a they say that the Tet Offensive of 1968, for example, was defeated. The U.S. government and its military were able to defeat the Tet Offensive of 1968, according to military analysts. But because of the media portrayal of it as a defeat, it's largely considered to be a defeat. But due to counterinsurgency tactics, that was actually a victory for U.S. and South Vietnamese forces. But using the large infantry and armored tactics that were used in Korea, that was a losing strategy in Vietnam. And largely, I would say, if you want a short answer, it has to be, in order to defeat guerrillas, you kind of have to emulate their tactics and remove their bases of operation.
So pretty much use the tactics right back against them, which I suppose is what American special forces are good at doing then in those situations. The Navy SEALs, for instance, seem to be experts in that regard. AC, we got you back now, eh?
Yeah.
Can we hear you? Okay, cool. We can hear you now. Yeah. Do you got anything to say yet? It sounded like you were going to say something before you cut out.
So, I think hitting on Vietnam, one of the things we weren't surprised was we were really hit with the culture war for Vietnam, unlike any other war. And I think that's a lot of the reason why there was these disconnects. Like, I wasn't even here and you guys basically landed on the same topic. That the media was pushing out a narrative that wasn't really in line with the truth.
We saw some of this, it seemed, during the Iraq War, because right off the bat, they were completely condemning it. And I'm sure there are reasons today to absolutely say that the Iraq War was like a lot of people these days will say the Iraq War was a disaster. But off the start, it started out okay. Like it seemed the Americans got their foothold and did all right. They almost set out democracy, and then everything fell apart. This is actually a very similar situation to the Battle of Oh, I can't remember the city right now, but it's the battle from Black Hawk Down in
Yeah, Battle
Somalia.
of Mogadishu.
Mogadishu, thank you. And this was a similar situation because the Americans were originally there in part of a relief mission. They were giving the supplies and food to the Somalis before eventually sentiments turned sour against the Americans, and then they rose up against them and ended up killing them. So this is I noticed something about this too when we're comparing these two situations. We're comparing the Iraq War, we're comparing the Battle of Mogadishu.
Yeah, I would say that one of the things, and I hate to make this a political issue because I see plenty of flaws with both parties' approach to defense in the U.S. But with the Democratic Party, the broad trend is, when you're in the opposition, every war is wrong, and when you're in the government, just keep it out of the headlines and you're fine. And that was basically the idea behind the Vietnam War at the beginning. That until 1965, a lot of Americans didn't even know that U.S. troops were in Vietnam as advisors, and gradually JFK and really Lyndon Johnson, they broadened the injection of U.S. forces there. They started out as advisors, they became combatants, and one day that they pretty much became, I think at one point they had 500,000 people there, which is, that dwarfs the Iraq War. I think at the largest point they had 250,000 people in Iraq during the troop surge. So, yeah, I think the media does they actually pump up pro-war sentiment at the beginning, and then once they've gotten what they need, they will turn against the war and blame it on the politicians, and it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving. More wars, more headlines, and more people to blame.
So it's all about the ratings. It seems to always be with the media.
Well,
geez,
that's why they're pushing all this, don't turn stuff. The media, they're just doing it for ratings. They're like, oh yeah, the millennials are reading our paper, woohoo!
Now, right now, as it stands, I know a lot of Americans would prefer to see the American military sort of focus inward, stop being more interventionist in the rest of the world. But when we're talking about interventionism, because sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it causes more harm than good. I would say in the Middle East, we could see how it's caused a lot of harm. But then in other situations, well, I would just say that a lot of it has led one over to the other. It seems like Taliban's led into Al Qaeda, into ISIS. But we can, again, I'd love to hear your point on that.
Obama basically started ISIS. So.
Well, he definitely let them grow for sure. But I don't know, what do you mean about starting ISIS? Like, in what way? Like just by allowing them to flourish, you mean? By just not doing anything about it?
I mean, he basically helped them. Our troops were fighting with ISIS at one point when Obama was president.
Yeah. I forgot about that one point. ISIS was also an ally, which also Al Qaeda was also an ally.
Absolute fucking insanity.
Yeah, I think that to some degree, Obama was definitely responsible for the ISIS flare-up. First of all, one of the problems with his approach was that he inherited the Iraq War, and he didn't know how to realistically wind it down without, basically fucking it up totally. But the Bush troop surge, for lack of a better, definition, it did it did help the U.S. Defeat the insurgency as of 2008. So, yeah, the war was practically won at one point. Although by starting the war, Bush created this whole new generation of people that hated the United States. So, so what Obama ended up doing was he said, well, I'm not going to spend my entire time in office dealing with a war that I was opposed to. So I'm going to pretend that I'm going to fight it, and then I'm going to draw people down, and then I'm going to announce when the date is that I'm going to leave. And one of the flaws of the U.S. strategy there was that they put into power a government that was run by basically the Shiite majority in Iraq. And who were the insurgents from? They were from the Sunni minority, which happens to be spread out across a larger territorial portion of Iraq. So you have this huge expanse of desert, and you have all these disaffected people that have no part in the Iraqi government that the U.S. has supported. So, Obama's strategy was horrible. He decided, well, we're just going to cut our losses there, and then when the insurgency did flare up again, he basically pretended that it was a small problem. There was the whole AC. You probably remember the JV comment.
Well, one thing I don't agree with you about that you said was you said that he created a whole new generation that hated the US. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm Generation X, and I remember that when I was a kid in the 80s, there was already an issue with the people in the Middle East saying, like, death to America, kind of that thing. Kind of think they didn't like us already if they were saying death to America.
Sure, but the U.S. being involved in a war there, it gave them the direct ability to fight the United States. So if we would have not started the 2003
war, using it as an excuse, but I think they always wanted to fight us. And I mean, I kind of suspect that there was even an agreement that Bush would go to war with them just so they could fight us. I mean, if you listen to the pro-Hamas type people talk, they say things like, well, 9/11 was X amount of years ago and we still haven't taken over the US. What's going on? Like, they look at all of that stuff as like permission to, I mean, they want to take over the US and they're not really trying to hide it.
Sure, but the real problem, I think, is not trying to go into their, not to go into their countries and try to, shoot the hate out of them, because I don't think that we're ever going to. I don't believe Iraq is ever going to be a country that embraces the system of government and the, I guess, the open society that we envision. Unless they were to,
Iraq has been at war as long as I can remember. When I was a child, Iran and Iraq were at war when I was a child, and before I was born, Iran and Iraq were at war. I mean, Iraq has, like, there's been wars in the Middle East as long as they've been Muslim. I mean, like, literally.
Sure, but why does that mean that we have to be involved in their wars? I mean, if it's their wars, let them. It's almost like, irrespective of what we do, they are going to be at war. That's my attitude towards it.
True, and I mean, we all know that the real reason why they were there was because Bush, Bush was president, and one of his brothers has the oil company. So he was there basically to try to get lower oil prices. So how does that work? Well, we were buying oil from Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, I think, doesn't like one of those countries. So basically, we were fighting in the Middle East for Saudi Arabia, because then Saudi Arabia would turn around and give the Bushes lower oil prices. Does that give the general, run-of-the-mill American lower oil prices? No. And then they turn around, and after they've sold us oil and they've made money off of us, they use that money to, like, buy influence in our country. So, I mean, you know, it's not like they're staying out of our country either. You know, you can sit there and say, like, oh, we've gotten into their country. They haven't stayed the fuck out of our country either.
That's true, but that
in our universities and placing, like, Al-Qaeda and you know, other, like, Muslim extremists to be professors in in, you know, Ivy League universities, especially, like, the name brand university, they've definitely gotten people into, and they even get people into, like, community colleges and stuff, but mostly they've focused on, like, taking over the narrative of the name brand universities.
well, I would argue that, yeah, absolutely, but that goes part and parcel. The whole thing of letting in more immigration and more people who are from those countries, from overseas, that goes part and parcel with the neocon and neoliberal world mindset, where the neoliberals say, well, we need a global economy. You know, we're going to have let people in who, you know, and teach them our values and whatever. We're going to have a global economy and everything. Well, the neocon, you know, corollary to that is, well, we're going to you know, we're going to spread American values by the sword. So I think it goes hand in hand, one with the other.
I mean,
And unfortunately,
growing up, but it's crap.
But who's the best person to cooperate with on that? It's the Saudi Arabians, because they believe in the same garbage. They believe in they spread their stuff the same way. So it really is, it's a perfect partnership between the two systems.
Yeah, like, that's something they started with. I think Vietnam is going back to that, when they started perpetrating this idea in America that we were spreading democracy by, like, going to war with people. I grew up on that narrative. Like, my mother told me that all the time. We'd be sitting there watching the news, and I'd be like, Mom, you know, why do we have troops in these places? And she'd be like, well, you know, the people themselves don't like the dictatorship, so we're going to help the people overthrow the dictatorship and set up a democracy over there. And you know what? Has it happened? Have we set up a democracy anywhere that we've been at war at these places that we're supposedly helping the, you know, what I was told by my mother, who I'm sure got the narrative from the media and from her teachers when she was in school, you know, and I got the same narrative from my teachers in school. Like, has any of this happened? No. I mean, this is why I'm a paleoconservative, and, you know, this is why a lot of leftists think they can't stand the Republican Party, because most of the Republicans that have been front and center have been neocons, and they're not real conservatives.
Well, damn. Well said, AC. I don't know. For a second there, I was expecting a rebuttal. But yeah,
I was like waiting. I was like, somebody say something. I'm done talking.
So anyway, then, since we're talking about interventionism, so what's your personal beliefs then? Do you believe that interventionism is ever acceptable, or do you think that the American military should be solely focused on defending its own borders then?
I mean, it may be necessary sometimes to be overseas, but I think for the most part, I mean, we have Muslim, like, camps or whatever. There's, what is it called? Islamburg, New York. And there's more just like it. If you've ever heard of it, or if you look it up, there's this Islamburg, New York, which is basically a camp full of Muslims, insurgents who sit there. It's like a training camp. It's like a training camp for them to, like, overtake the U.S. inside our borders. And they claim they can't do anything about it because it's private property. Are you kidding me?
What about you, Bold?
There
Well,
has to be a way we can do something. We have enemies within our borders. I mean, when you, I pledge to defend the, the U.S. against enemies, domestic and foreign. Like, if you're saying that they get a pass because they're citizens, well, actually, no, they don't. If they're sitting there like having a military, training camp against us within our own borders, there has to be a way that has to be like, that has to fall under something. I don't understand it. I just don't understand how that can be legal, and there cannot be some way that can fall under some sort of, federal guideline. I mean, we count on our government to defend us. I mean, that the American government's number one purpose is to defend its citizens. It's not to provide welfare for the world. It's not, it's not to defend citizens of other nations. It's to defend its own citizens. We give taxes, so our government is supposed to stick up for us and to provide some law and order in our country, instead of this insanity, allowing killers to go free. Hello, Kate Steinle, anyone?
All right, so you sound much more about personal defense in when it comes to the U.S. military, then, eh?
Yeah.
Alrighty. So
yeah,
no to
absolutely.
interventionism. We got one no to interventionism, for one for personal protection. How about you, Bold?
Well, I don't think that interventionism is the same thing as I mean, for example, Islamberg. I fully agree. That's a part of. I think it's in upstate New York somewhere. And
Yes.
there's other examples. I think in North Carolina there's a similar case where there's a insular
there's one
community.
In Tennessee. There's, I think, 17 across the U.S.
So there you're talking about the same threat that we've seen. It's happened here. It's happened. I mean, it's happened in non-Islamic cases in Japan with the Aum Shinrikyo cult that they if anybody knows about the Tokyo subway bombing. So that's talking about internal security in the U.S. and I think that the FBI has been conscious of it for decades. They know about this, and they've done very little, and they've neglected their brief, which is
they're too busy trying to overthrow Trump.
There's definitely things that we could be doing to prevent that are already part of the legal structure of the United States, and we could be doing it legally. And what interventionism, in my mind, the problem with that is, when you start, for example, the war on terror, or it's been started against our will because of 9/11. Let's say but it started before 9/11, and a lot of the problems that led to the war on terror could have been prevented by the intelligence services prior to that, without interventionism. I mean, we had the 1993 terror attack on the World Trade Center. What was done in response to that? Almost nothing. There was the Khobar Towers attack due to our having contractors in Saudi Arabia. What was done in response to that? Virtually nothing. So, instead, what was the solution? To get involved in wars virtually across the globe. Again, in Somalia and and it's not to say that I'm thrilled about everything that's been going on in these countries. I'm thrilled that Saddam Hussein was it's not like I wanted him to remain in power. It's not like I want Bashar Assad to remain in power right now. But the idea that we're going to create we're not going to create a safer world by being involved in every country that is run by some sort of psychopathic dictator. I'm not sure all of them are psychopaths, but there's a reason why we didn't invade Cuba. There's a reason why we didn't, and if we would have invaded Cuba, would we have let it go on its own way afterward? That's the real question. And that for me, that's why I'm against interventionism abroad. And in the United States, I think that the surveillance state has been a failure. If the surveillance state had been a success, we wouldn't have had the Boston bombing. We wouldn't have had a lot of the other terror attacks that were started basically on an amateur level. that have been perpetrated. They were talking about the shooting that last week. They were talking about some of the shootings that have happened. The Fort Hood shooting, for example, there were plenty of warning signs.
Yeah. Speaking of the shooting last week, I have a little meme up on the screen here. When I talk, I think people can see it.
Right now I see your avatar.
Icon.
Oh! Oh,
Although
yeah.
I did see you have one up just a few minutes earlier, though.
Oh, I must have turned off the screen sharing. I closed something. There we go. Screen sharing. There we go. Screen sharing. Speaking of the shooting, you can see that, right?
Oh yes, I remember seeing that meme. Yeah.
I was like, this is exactly it. This meme says it all. Kill, kill, kill. Go away, kid. We're too busy committing treason.
It's a funny meme. Sorry, Bold, were you done? Did you have anything else you wanted to add on to your thoughts?
Well, I mean, she put up a meme that speaks volumes about it. It's that, we see all these threats coming. So let's assume that we do have threats from overseas. Well, we allow those threats to penetrate our borders, and part of that is by letting a lot of these students come in and learn in our universities through subsidized programs that are a result of our relationships, for example, with Saudi Arabia, but also with other countries throughout the world.
Learn in our universities. They're placing these people as professors.
Yeah, and China also. Let's not forget China. They have a large influence in
oh yeah, I had especially a lot of Chinese in school with me.
Yeah, and in tech, and that's not and by saying this, one of the things that they'll say is you're being xenophobic by saying this. It's quite the contrary. You're actually respecting these. I respect China. I'm not going to say I respect Saudi Arabia. They're kind of, I'm just not. I think Saudi Arabia is kind of a country ruled by basically, rich, entitled fanatics. But Iran, I definitely respect them as a country. I disagree heavily with, their form of government and the way that they behave towards their own people. But we've allowed them to basically infiltrate our shores. And then once that's done, oh, well, we have to start a war over there in Iraq or in other countries, and then accept their migrants that are created through these wars. It's not a left or right issue. It's an issue of strategy.
That's all of those countries are involved. Willing to take refugees? No, but their governments just say no, and they don't have these runaway medias that are pushing a narrative to make people push for something that's absolutely insane, like we have. I mean, how many people are flipping gun control? It's insanity. We don't need gun control now. It's, we need the FBI and the local police to be allowed to do their job. And politicians, we know that mayors are standing down their police. We know this. And I mean, the FBI is ignoring a lot of stuff too. I mean, we have people who are openly, saying they want to overthrow the U.S. government, and the FBI isn't doing anything about it.
We've actually seen something of this going on in England right now, because the people of England are very upset that their police force aren't doing anything. They've actually spent most of their time doing PA and not actually solving crimes. And again, yeah, we're seeing this because...
Yeah, and if you complain about it, oh, you're a right-wing extremist.
Exactly. But it's gotten to the point, maybe you saw the article. Maybe you saw...
You want the Second Amendment, all of a sudden you're some, right-wing gun nut. It's like, my father was a Democrat and had a shotgun under his bed. When did being pro... I don't even own a gun, but I am pro Second Amendment because I understand that the Second Amendment was put in place as a hedge against people to have guns. And if we have to overtake the government because they get too out of control, I know how to shoot. Somebody will have a spare gun. I'll jump in,
Well, yeah,
But
exactly. But again, you were saying just a minute or two earlier about, some people are telling you let like the police do their job, blah blah blah. But if we're again faced with a
but they're
situation such as England, exactly, if they're faced with a situation where they're not doing their job, then what else are the citizens supposed to
I
do
mean,
if it's
we
if they're
have
disarmed?
like here in the US, we have too many we have too much of a situation with I mean, like the cops are afraid to do their job because they're afraid of horrible PR. We have all these higher ups in the FBI who we know are more obsessed. We don't like the president that the American people selected through the Electoral College, which is in the Constitution. So, I mean, the meme says it all. They really are for trying to get in the media and convince the American people to elect politicians, try to get him. I mean, that's their goal. They figure they'll turn people on the politicians and turn people on Trump, hoping that the people will Congress, people, and Senate, so they'll have enough that they can impeach him, even though he didn't do anything wrong. They're trying to make it appear like he did something wrong. So, I mean, it's not really warfare like the topic, but I mean, it's all related.
Well, this is actually a good example of information warfare, which is being seen as which is rising as one of the biggest form of warfare right now, whether that be misinformation or, yeah, exactly. And I guess we've been facing a lot of that with our media.
Yeah, I don't know if it's really rising. I think we've been misinformed for a long time, but with the rise of the internet, I think we're starting to realize, and people who are realizing and who are getting the proof, like people like YouTubers like us, we're starting to be able to find this stuff. I mean, I was watching a video last night, the Red and Green Axis with Claire Lopez, and she spoke at a Tea Party convention thingy in South Carolina. And I don't know if you know who Claire Lopez is, but she gets interviewed by Fox and OANN. She's mostly a specialist on Iran and Iraq, I think. But so she was speaking and she was talking about how we have to get information out there. This is what I wanted to say. She was pointing out how they don't do a very good job of in the process of them using the internet to try to recruit people for their purpose, they're leaving a trail behind that we can find very easily. If you look at, she brought this up. I was surprised that the boomer generation knew about this, but she brought up Jesse Aragon being a Facebook member of, BAM. And that's when these people aren't doing a very good job of hiding this stuff. They're putting all this. It's like they think that their opponents have never heard of the internet.
Researching for themselves. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right?
Now, when we're talking, getting a little bit more back on the terms of war, I know, AC, we kind of covered it real quick earlier, but Bold, what do you think of when we're talking about the future of warfare? What do you see?
Not a whole lot good, because there's more and more lethal and less personal ways to conduct warfare. There's more and more automation to it, and of course drone warfare is already a reality. And one of the problems is that...
Was he here when we were talking about the robot warriors?
No.
I don't think he was here yet.
What?
Oh, we were talking earlier about pretty much what you're talking about now, automatons fighting wars for us.
Well, the logic behind that was that in that case you wouldn't have to deal with the human loss. It would basically be one country's technology against another's. But of course, that's what some people thought, that chemical weapons was a more humane way to conduct warfare. Some people thought that the nuclear bomb was a more humane way to conduct warfare. So, yeah. I mean, if you guys already covered it, I think that you're never going to see an end to the conventional warfare that we've seen, but you're just going to see other types of conventional warfare. Of course, there's the possibility of some of these some of these subversive tactics like the EMPs that people have talked about. But I don't know if there's a way to know exactly what's going to happen. Obviously, science fiction is given like a great guideline for the people who have the worst intentions for humanity.
I was actually saying that I saw when we're talking about future warfare, I could totally see sort of a Terminator type future where where the machines and the AIs have taken over and have launched the nukes to destroy us all. Because the one thing I was comparing this to was when we looked at sort of back of this past summer when we were dealing with Trump and Kim Jong-un with they were wondering whether the nukes were going to fly. I was saying that I think in a situation like that, if we're dealing with a cold calculating computer, it wouldn't take in the human factor, and it would just take into the number, it would factor in the chance of survival. And in that case, we could easily see a robot that was willing to fire those nukes off to destroy North Korea, believing that that would be actually the best course of survival. But then if you have a human behind the button, we all know what the outcome of that would be, and it actually would be worse if we were to actually fire those nukes. Do you actually? What about you? Do you think I'm way off base, or do you think I'm being way too paranoid about this? Or
who, me?
Asking me or AC?
Both.
Well, I think you're right. I think one of the reasons why we haven't fired on them is I think Trump realizes they don't really. I mean, it's like what they say about like guys and their big trucks and stuff. The men that show off the most are the ones that don't really have it. I mean, Kim Jong-un showed, but I'm not really sure he has it. I'm not convinced.
I would say that the idea of a false positive, for example, a situation where the system perceives a threat that isn't actually there. Yeah, that's been. I mean, that's happened with non-nuclear threats. That's happened with, for example, I think the Iran aircraft that was shot down in the 90s in the Gulf, for example. So it could happen with human human actors as well. And it's a the real problem is that as sophisticated as technology gets, you have to remember that there's no such thing as the perfect system, and there's always the outlier that comes into play. There's for example, in the days of radar, I think there were certain birds that would show up as enemy fighters, for example. So I don't know what the answer is to it. I mean, you can't just dismantle the defense structure and stop developing new defense programs because you think you're going to destroy the world, because China's developing some of the same type of technologies, and the other countries aren't going to stop either.
Oh, well, we definitely haven't. I mean, stop producing these technologies too. I mean, there's a theory that we all know that the Area 51 is connected to the UFO theory. But one theory I've heard about it that I think is much more plausible is the fact that Area 51 is an area for advanced military technology and research. And I think this is much more plausible because, well, number one, UFOs only really started in sightings around World War II. And we know the Germans were working on a lot of secret technology, including aircrafts. And then after that, we had Operation Paperclip, which brought over a lot of the German scientists. And then soon after, that's when we started seeing the rise of UFO sightings in America. So we definitely are working on these technologies without a doubt. And this is actually what I believe that theory, when we're talking about Area 51, it has to do with advanced technology.
I think you're right. And I actually I know that there are underground military bases. I don't want to talk too much about it, but there are military bases that are underground, scattered throughout the U.S. So it's rumored there.
There's one rumor that there's a big military base under Denver International Airport, whether you believe that or not, but that's supposedly the rumor. So, but yeah, I've heard of a lot of these.
Wouldn't surprise me.
These underground bunkers.
I do know that. I know that there's a few I mean, I think you have to have a pretty high clearance to actually like be stationed at them. But I too much specifics and what, so I won't say more. But I do know that there are some U.S. that are underground within the U.S. I think that like that's like a huge secret, but I think exactly like where they are and stuff would be more of a secret. So I'll just leave it at that.
Fair enough. Don't want to get yourself in trouble.
I mean, and I think a lot of, I mean, like in Israel, they found that the Palestinians had like tunnels underneath Israel, and they were rumored for a long time, and then eventually like they just dug through and found them, which Bolt here probably knows me.
I think our connection is
good. Bolt here probably knows more about that than me.
What was the question?
Sorry, yes, we were talking.
I was mentioning.
Go ahead, AC.
Mentioning how, like, you know, like warfare in Israel, how the Palestinians have like, or they had tunnels from Egypt into the Gaza Strip and stuff, and like these were big enough to like ship an entire vehicle. These weren't tunnels, like these were like almost like tubular military bases underneath. You could
that was
drive a car from Egypt, I think.
That was a development that came about largely because of the early part of the Second Intifada. I was actually in the military during the Second Intifada, which, by the way, the word Intifada means kind of an uprising or an awakening in Arabic. And
yeah,
you know, initially.
Yeah, when I was at not a speech, like a protest in New York, we had an ex-Muslim, and she was like, "Do you guys want it?" People were like, "Huh?" And then she's like, "Do you want an intifada?" And then like people were like, "Oh no!" And then like I got home and I like looked it up. I was like, "Oh no, we don't want that." I think people didn't really react because they didn't really know what it was. But yeah, no, we don't want an intifada.
Yeah. So.
Oh, go ahead.
So
continue.
Yeah, I don't think that we're really talking about the same level of sophistication here, although it has gotten more sophisticated. You know, comparing it to the U.S. government, I don't think is correct. But yes, during my time and you know, certainly, you know, starting before I started in, you know, my military career, which was not very long, only about 2.5 years, because I didn't want to continue. You know, I wasn't in a position that I liked. You know, I was kind of a grunt on the checkpoints, but you know, you could see that there was sort of this ramping up in the Gaza Strip, especially of the war material effort, including producing their own domestic arms. You know, especially hand grenades and rockets and ammunition as well. A lot of it from recycled ammunition. But initially, the Palestinian fighters were, you know, they were from across the spectrum of their society. You know, there was the obviously the Islamist groups that AC was talking about, which were the Islamic Jihad and Hamas, and you know, there's some smaller groups.
I think they're using them in Europe now.
What's that?
They're using them in Europe now, I think she said.
The rockets? I think she still has connection issues. Let me just keep going. So the Palestinian forces, they, at the beginning of the Intifada, a lot of them were from the government. For example, they would moonlight, so to speak, as
Yeah, did you? Yeah, I said the grenades.
Oh, okay. yeah, handmade grenades and things like that, or you know, made in kind of you know, home machine shops or whatever you want to call them. So one of the issues with the Palestinian forces was that steadily as the Intifada went on, Fatah, which is the governing party, who are less Islamic. I mean, they do have a lot of Islamic symbolism in their rhetoric, but they're technically secular. They began to lose power to the Islamists, and the Islamists were more self-starting. They wanted to create their own arms industry. They obviously were able to import a lot of weapons from Iran, and what they ended up doing was they would build these tunnels from Egypt that they would use to smuggle in weapons into the Gaza Strip. And you know, that has become really streamlined today. And I wouldn't say it's a space age technology, the tunnels, although they're not exactly like tunnels you would see in, you know, let's say one of those cartoons with what would you say, like Wile E. Coyote or whatever. They're pretty. A lot of them are paved, and you can actually drive motorcycles through them, and probably soon full four-wheeled vehicles.
You said full four-wheeled vehicles will be able to fit through there?
I think in the future you're gonna see them, because they're not dealing with the issue at all, and the only way to deal with the issue would be for there to be a social change in Gaza that would upend whatever is going on there. But I don't see it happening. I don't see the mentality changing there. I don't see the mentality changing on the Israeli side either. I think if anything, there's going to be more wars there. And a lot of these people talking about continuing the peace process, they don't know what the hell they're talking about, because they don't understand the mentality of either side. They believe both sides have some sort of desire for peace in them that simply ignores real events.
Well, one thing. What's going on, Libertarian?
Hey, how's it going? Hey, Bold. Don't you think the Israelis have a reason for peace because of the pressure from the outside world? On the other hand, the Palestinians don't. If they keep pressing forward, then they may gain more traction, which makes a plus in their column, right?
I don't understand the question entirely. Are you saying that the Israelis have a reason for peace because the world is pressuring them, or because they have?
Because directly the United States is pressuring them. That's why they even opened up to a two-state solution. They never wanted that, did they not?
Well, there's always been a significant portion of the Israeli public that has wanted to engage in peace initiatives with the Palestinians, and you know, there's been humanists, and there's been, even within the military community, that they don't believe in eternal war with the Palestinians. But on the other side, you know, there's the type of attitude that I just mentioned is so rare, and many of the people who say it publicly are not really, I'd say, being candid in their feelings. That yeah, I think sure, the U.S. pressure on the Israelis has been real. It's much less strong under the Trump administration than it was under President Clinton or President Bush or President Obama, but it'll always be there. But the reality is that as people have watched, you know, basically the degrading of Palestinian society into almost a theocracy on the one hand, and a corrupt leadership in Gaza on the other hand, the peace-seeking community on the Israeli side doesn't really have any achievements on its side. And they're not going to have any achievements, because they're also run by inept and corrupt individuals that are part of the same circles of you know, they're the Angela Merkel types. It's the same type of person. They're not people who are actually looking for a practical solution to the conflict. They're looking to satisfy the desires of the world at large. And in my opinion, that's why I oppose, for example, foreign aid. I think that causes concessions that are ill-advised on the Israeli side. I think I oppose foreign aid with the Palestinians because it encourages dependency on their side. It encourages dependency on the Israeli side as well. So, yeah, go ahead.
I'm hugely against foreign aid. Hugely.
Well, so am I. But Bold, I would like to ask you: do you believe in a two-state solution? I don't. I believe Israel should keep what it won in the '60s war, in the 7 Days War or whatever. I believe that Palestine isn't really going to happen without them overthrowing the Israeli forces.
Well, I think you have a conflict on your own hand in the background there, but yeah.
Well, the wife's hand, yeah. Well, there's only three back there whining. The wife's handling that. Sorry.
Only three.
I don't know. I think she might need your help.
But in any case, I do want to chime in. Since you asked, I don't. A two-state solution would be possible if there were two sides that truly believed in coexistence. But in reality, you have on the one hand the Israeli government, which they have a vast military-industrial complex of their own, and on the other hand, you have the Palestinian movements and a corrupt leadership. So no, I can't believe, given the results, I can't believe in a two-state solution. I'd rather see, I would very much like to see the Palestinians have a responsive and liberty-loving government the way I would want it. But a lot of the public don't care about that over there. A lot of the people over there would rather have that type of oppressive regime that does dictate their lifestyle and everything. And the ones that don't, a lot of them, guess where they end up? They end up in cities like Detroit, in Ohio, where I live, and everything. And I don't begrudge anybody their heritage for being a Palestinian. I think it's fine. That God made you the way you are, and they gave you the parents that you had. But to give them a state in the with the type of rhetoric that they believe in and their track record. No, I think Jordan, for example, they were perfectly capable of administering the realms of what is now the West Bank when they did. There wasn't peace. There was definitely cross-border conflict, but a two-state solution is kind of a joke in my opinion. You're talking about you've seen what they've done with the quasi-state that they have now. It's largely dependent on foreign aid. The institutions there are, they're basically bankrolled by the EU and by NGOs across the world and the UN. And it's not fair to the rest of the world to have to manage the affairs of any country. And that includes the Palestinians, it includes the Israelis. And I feel that if the less other countries get involved, at some point, the friction will have to be resolved by the Israelis and the Palestinians. And it might end up in a two-state solution. It might not end up in a two-state solution, but it's not for the outside world to dictate.
Well, wait a minute, though. The outside world created the state of Israel, did it not?
The British Empire did give them a mandate to create a Jewish homeland. It was created. Yes, absolutely. Interventionism created all the modern states of the Middle East.
I wouldn't exactly agree, because what gets lost a lot of times, I mean, I think you and I probably know this, but what Mad Dog probably doesn't know is the last time, before Israel was Israel, it was the British mandate for Palestine. So the Britain, the UK, they had control of what we now call Israel. Now, the flag for the British mandate for Palestine actually had, let me get this up here.
Yeah, I know what she's talking about.
Yeah, the flag actually had the Mogen David on it. But before it was the British mandate for Palestine, it was it belonged to the Ottoman Empire, which was Christian. Thank you very much.
It was Muslim.
I'm pretty sure it's Muslim.
Well, after they sacked Constantinople, I mean,
Turkey. When Turkey was formed, there we go. I found it. When Turkey was formed, Okay. Oops. There we go. When Turkey was formed, so you can see, where is it? Over. Yeah, right here. Right there. You can see that there was a Mogen David on the flag for the British Mandate for Palestine. But Turkey, when it was originally formed, when the Ottoman Empire broke up, Turkey was Christian. It's Muslim now, but it was Christian then. Lebanon was Christian. They overthrew Lebanon in the early 80s. Iraq used to be like half Christian with some Yazidis, and they're killing the Yazidis, they're killing the Christians. All of this stuff gets lost. Like, everybody thinks that all of these areas were all Muslim for a long time, and that's really not true. I mean, we've kind of ignored that part of the world, but that world was more Christian, and it's become less and less Christian, and everybody just doesn't seem to realize, and even like the Muslim countries, some of them used to be much more free. Like, they had a revolution in Iran, and prior to that, like, women didn't have to wear hijabs or anything. But they overthrew the government, and it was actually a democracy. Like, people don't even realize that. This was like when I was like really, really little. And I know about it because I read an autobiography from a woman who grew up in that time. And she grew up in Iran while it was getting overthrown. And then I went and I looked into the history, and I was like, oh, I had no idea. And I asked like older people and stuff, and they're like, yeah, I remember that. Oh, yeah, that's correct. The older people are not doing their due diligence and like making sure younger people are learning the proper history. And I think people are assuming that we're learning the proper history in school, and we're really not. Especially the millennials are not learning the proper history.
Well, analytical. So you're telling me that Constantinople wasn't sacked in the 1600s and made Muslim, made into Istanbul? Because I mean, I believe it was.
Yeah, that's how I remember it.
But there were still parts of the Ottoman Empire that were Christian. And people are acting like that's not the case.
After World War I, there was a huge exodus of first of all, there was Armenian genocide. So
exactly,
a lot of the Christians were killed during the Armenian genocide. Then a lot of the Greeks who lived in Western Turkey were expelled, and likewise the Turks who lived in Greece and the rest of the Balkans were sent back. They were forced back to Turkey. So it was a massive population exchange. So nobody talks about that refugee crisis of that era. That I think.
Yeah, and Jews were all over the Middle East, and after Israel was formed, they were basically kicked out of all the other countries, told that like, you have your own state now, go home.
Well, my grandparents on one side, they were from Baghdad, and that's at a certain point, I think it was a couple years after Israel was formed, they were expelled. They were only allowed to take one piece of luggage, and that was it. And a lot of them never recovered. Now, what's happened is that the Palestinian refugees, who a lot of them, I think, they're genuinely victims of the whole conflict, but they were caused to remain refugees as a means to continue the conflict. But whereas what's it called? My grandparents weren't refugees for probably, I mean, they were probably refugees for maybe 3 or 4 years, and they were given citizenship. That's the difference between refugees and every other conflict, except for that one. And it is tremendously unfair for Palestinians who they did live in countries like Syria and Lebanon and Kuwait, that they were kept in a state of complete disenfranchisement there, because they were told, well, we're going to win the next war and you'll get your homes back. So that they've been fed this lie for many years, and now the Arab states they have to deal with the Frankenstein monster that they helped create, because these people are not going to give up on that myth of the founding and the return, al-Auda, as they say in Arabic, the return, to the, Palestine. They believe in that as strongly as in whatever religion they have. Some of them are Christian and they believe in it just as strongly as the Muslims do. And
Well,
that.
I mean, a lot of these people also weren't from Palestine. I mean, if you look at like the leader of the Fatah movement, Yasser Arafat, he was born in Egypt. What home did he have in Palestine?
That part of it is not that part is true, but we're not talking about right or wrong here. We're talking about the perception among the people, and the perception among the people, even though I do see that there's are you talking to me, Maddodge? I didn't unfollow you on Twitter. But sorry, I just saw his chat. Or maybe it unfollowed me automatically. Anyway, but I'm sorry for people who think that there is no Palestinian people because it never existed anymore. But in the minds of millions of people, of course they think it is, and that's the real issue. It's a reality, whether it's a reality that was manufactured or not. So now we have to deal with telling them that their expectations of reclaiming their entire homeland, as they were told, are basically just a package of lies that have been told to them for years and years. They've created a whole culture and symbolism around it. You can see that there's a character named Handala who maybe I'll try to bring him up. He's a cartoon character, and he's basically the symbol of the. Here, can somebody give me control?
Sorry, what do you need?
I need to show basically.
Screen sharing you do on your own.
Oh, okay.
You go over to the side. Oh, you got it.
Can you guys see this?
Yeah.
So this is a character named Handala who was created in I think the 60s. Might have been even before the 67 war. That I think who was it? Adrian, you mentioned, and it's somebody who's facing away from the viewer, and he's usually got his hands behind his back, and he's the symbol of like the hapless refugee, and that's the symbolism of the entire Palestine people, the people of Palestine. But it's an aspirational symbol. It's the same as the way that they portray the civil rights movement here. There's people who it doesn't matter how much progress happens, there's going to be a Jesse Jackson and an Al Sharpton who will rail against corporations for not hiring enough black people, for example. It's the same type of mentality, excuse me, that you'll see throughout the Palestinian world. And now the idea that because so to speak, some of them they were the descendants of Jordanians, or they were the descendants of Lebanese or Egyptians, that somehow makes the issue more simple, because you could say, oh, there is no Palestinian people. Well, that doesn't really solve the issue. Now they've created a people, and they exist now, and we're going to have to address what's going to happen to those people. And the real problem is that this whole issue was created by not addressing the problem back in 1950, by not addressing the problem in 1968, by not addressing the problem in any of the other milestones that have come since then.
So basically, they decide that it's their land, and somehow the rest of the world is supposed to address that. I mean, yeah, it's a PR problem at this point, but it's not their land.
Yeah, you can say it's not their land, but the fact of the matter is that a lot of them still live there, and something has to be done. Now, I agree with, I don't know who said it, but Maddodge, that conceding land to them to begin with was a horrible idea. And you know, every step of the way, there should have been this, in my opinion, a hard line tactic of saying, no, we're not going to give land away, would have actually saved lives. And accepting more aid and deepening the relationship with the United States was a just a catastrophic decision by past Israeli governments, by past American governments too, and it's caused immense you know, resentment among people on both sides. And you know, there's a lot of people on the right, for example, the Ron Paul crowd, sorry, you know, the more libertarian
my
side,
crowd. Yeah,
right,
my
exactly,
crowd.
that they're against the foreign aid. And you know, I tend to subscribe to that idea, but there's a lot of people on the Israeli end who say that the foreign aid has only caused more and more concessions and lack of real wiggle room to have an independent foreign policy on the Israeli side. So I'd say it's been a mutually problematic issue. I'd say if people want to sell arms to a country like Israel, it shouldn't be done through this bizarre relationship of they call it loan guarantees and things like that. It's only inflated the problem, and it's created this unhealthy relationship.
Well, Bold, yes or no? Do the Israelis have nuclear weapons? And if the answer is yes, can they not defend themselves?
Yeah, I'd say it is yes to both of those questions. And they acquired nuclear weapons, I believe, through an espionage program. I think they might have even stolen it from one of the programs here in America, but I could be wrong. And that's the way it usually happens, by the way. I think that's how Pakistan got it and how India got it, you know, through espionage, and how China, by the way, also they acquired their nuclear weapons. And yes, they are capable of defending themselves, but conventionally as well, they have a domestic arms industry that produces sophisticated weapons. And you know, I'm not against having arms dealing between countries. But what I see as a problem is that you create these commitments that entangle different countries in areas where they actually cause more problems. And I think you can make the argument that American involvement through foreign aid has hurt both the Israeli and the Palestinian sides and created dependent countries. They haven't created independent countries.
Which I would make that argument. That would be the basis of my argument, and I say end all foreign aid.
And by the way, the types of opinions that I've been, you know, sharing with you guys on, you know, within a lot of the conservative, you know, Jewish circles, you know, the AIPAC types, they look at it, they kind of laugh at you. They're like, well, of course they need foreign aid. Of course, I mean, it's the special relationship. And they talk about the evangelicals and Ted Cruz and whatever. But they won't sit down and actually look at it. And sometimes they'll even call you, you know, or me. You know, they'll call me some sort of, you know, anti-Semite or anti-Zionist. It has nothing to do with Zionism or Judaism. It has to do with what's the best way forward for everybody involved. So, you know, I wish that people were thinking about it back in the 80s before the fake peace process began. Because otherwise, I mean, college campuses have come alive with pro-Palestine sentiment, but these people don't understand who the Palestinians are. They don't understand who the Israelis are. They don't understand what America's problem is with foreign aid. They would probably fine until the end of time with giving aid to the Palestinians because they're biased to one side, and they don't see that the issue, for example, is you know, it includes what AC is talking about, that the Palestinian people don't have a truly socially forward-thinking leadership at any level. That they're ruled by basically these warlords who may be Islamist or they may be secular, but in either way, they're not going to create a society that is looking to have a peaceful relationship with especially the Israelis, but probably other neighbors. But on the Israeli side, yeah, I would say that you know, that it's a major problem, and AIPAC, in my opinion, I've spoken, you know, on my channel, and you know, I'm a small guy. I've spoken about AIPAC being more of a problem for Israel than it's been a solution for Israel, because the solution is never to spend more money on a problem that was created partially as a result of spending money. The solution is to change something to get less of the harmful actors involved, you know, get them removed from the issue. It's the same approach that should be taken to the Syrian war. Unfortunately, I don't think that adding more troops there from any country, whether it's Russia, the US, or Iran, or Turkey, is actually going to solve the problem. It has to be solved and you know, litigated by the Syrians themselves in order for a solution to come about. And I think the same applies to most of the conflicts around the world that involve many nations.
Well,
Yeah, I'm against foreign aid for any country. The idea that we're like propping up these countries that would otherwise, like, I mean, if you look at, you know, how these countries have like populations that are bursting at the seams, you know, because our government and all these charities from our country are giving these people food because they're starving. It's like, well, you know, let the Darwinian laws take their course, and you know, I mean, you know, they can't sustain themselves. I mean, if you look at South Africa, what's going on with South Africa right now is they decided to have affirmative action. So they fired a lot of the white people, and now they're running out of water because they don't have enough engineers. Because the average IQ of the black Africans is like 70. And I mean, and they even had, you know, they had white people there and they had white Jews there. So, I mean, you know, they had people there who would have had average IQs between like, you know, 100 and 115, you know, compared to these people with an IQ of 70. Like, that's a huge difference. And you know, the blacks, the African blacks, because black Americans actually have a higher IQ, a higher average IQ than African blacks. And the African blacks, like, they don't have the ability, even if they taught them how to, like, desalinate the water from the ocean and stuff, like, they can't. They just can't. So, you know, and they can't farm for these reasons too, because they can't water their crops because they can't understand how to do these things. So they're getting rid of the people who have the understanding to be able to do these things. Like, they kicked the farmers out of Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, and now they're starving because they have no food. You know, they're killing the farmers in South Africa because, stop propping up these other countries. We send these people food, and what do? All they do is sit there and think that, you know, like, they're getting, you know, I mean, we can't take care of them forever, and we're artificially propping them up. They need to learn how to take care of themselves, and if they can't, their society needs to dwindle out. You know, that's the way it's supposed to be. Like, you know, if we try to take care of everyone who just doesn't have the same gifts from God, you know, who doesn't have the same IQ power, the same brain power as us, we're going to spend us and all of our ancestors are basically, I mean, the way it's going now is we're going to take care of all of these countries that are going to turn around and backlash at us until all of these people, like, kill off all of the smarter people. And, you know, I mean, these idiot globalists think, like, then they're going to take control. But there'll be too many of them. And they'll just kill all the ancestors of, like, you know, these globalists that think they're going to, like, run the world and have, like, a world full of slaves for themselves. Like, they're just going to get overrun and killed, and they're stupid.
Yeah, well, first I want to address Bold. Don't you think maybe if Israel just took what they got and kept it, and drew a hard line that maybe Palestine would maybe merge into the society. Now, hold that thought. Analytical, where you're going with South Africa. All right, so South Africa was a product of colonization, and they threw the British Empire out. And then later on, after the segregation happened, they decided, white people are bad. And that was a backlash against the segregation. So they're going to go through their own thing. That doesn't necessarily mean they need to all die. What it means is they need a stable political government, and they need to integrate the white population with the black. They need to figure out their racial diversity, in my opinion.
It's not going to happen. It's not happening. I mean,
Did it not happen in the southern United States? I mean, Reconstruction was a bitch. I'm a southerner.
Yeah, but South Africa isn't the United States. I mean, only 8% of the population is white. They're being overrun by the blacks, and they're being murdered ruthlessly so.
Can I react
and
to
then
both of those questions?
going, why don't we have any water anymore? It's like, well, because you don't have anybody who knows how to make the water. You fired them. You killed them. Why don't we have any crops anymore? Because you fired them. You killed them. You ran them out of town.
Bold, you wanted to respond to that?
Yeah, I think I'll go with the South Africa theme first. Yeah, there's definitely what's going on right now is an ethnic cleansing of the white people of South Africa, and I think one of the flaws was that people think of Nelson Mandela as the peacemaker in South Africa. What they don't take into account is that Mandela might have been for reconciliation, but his followers and his lieutenants, including the past successors, Jacob Zuma, who's the recently deposed leader of the ANC over there, they don't care about that because they're old hands at the guerrilla lifestyle, and they're perfectly fine reigniting a civil war over there and creating pretty much a society where it's the same thing happened in Uganda in the 70s with the removal of Asians. And by the way, there's not only just white people living in South Africa as a minority. There's also Indian and East Asian people. Who's to say what's going to happen with them? And when you have movements like what's going on right now, where you have Zimbabwean refugees. They're refugees from what I don't agree with everything that AC said about them being low IQ, but they're definitely low motivation people. The leaders of ZANU PF in Zimbabwe, that's the ruling party. They're classical Maoists, and what Maoists do is they create basically total social upheaval, destroys traditional society, and then when it's time to pick up the pieces and you have a massive economic crisis like the Great Leap Forward in China, they decide to eliminate the middle class.
With Maoists here in the United States.
Yeah.
Which is Slack. Those are Maoists too.
Yeah. So you have an African variant of that. Now, are some of the things the IQ stuff and whatever, and the water thing? Well, that's a result of the Maoist mentality and their belief. Oh, you need to emphasize the peasant aspect of the proletariat and all of that, and deconstruct and end all of this bourgeois and Western capitalist influence and everything. It's the same type of thing. They have a movement there in South Africa called the EFF that are even more further to the left than the ruling African National Congress, and they're doing it. And I've actually been in a back and forth fight with one of their supporters in South Africa, who's a Zimbabwean expat. He doesn't care that his country, Zimbabwe, ended up that way due to the policies of Robert Mugabe, because everything that Mugabe did wrong, he believes was due to outside Western influence and pressure, and basically colonialism. And by the way, he uses the protocols of the elders of Zion as his blueprint for why it's happening. And what are you supposed to say to somebody like that? At a certain point, you just accept that they don't have a similar viewpoint to yours. What was the other question you had, Maddodge?
Yeah. So if Israel had they hold the West Bank and they suppress the Palestinians. They hold their territory. What necessarily makes that bad if they allow them to worship? I
don't see anything. I don't see anything wrong with. I mean, I think I mentioned it earlier that if they would have held a hard line, years ago. And by the way, I come from a background. Originally, I was very pro peace process. Back in growing up, I have a family that they have obviously roots in the region on both sides. And I kind of was the black sheep. I was for a peace process. I was against occupying the West Bank, and then it took kind of a few years of observation and reading, and then finally experiencing the region for myself to discover that no, that there has to be two willing participants in a trade-off, and there is nothing to gain from giving more territory to a group of people that they're bent on basically subjugating their own people too, and that's on top of killing their the other group, which would be the Jews, for example, or the Israelis. But let's say, I mean, hypothetically, if there were to be a one-state solution, let's go take it to the other extreme, guys. Let's go all Escape from New York, Kurt Russell style. If there were to be a one-state solution, giving as Noam Chomsky and Norman Finkelstein, two far-left Jewish commentators, and also the Palestinians want they want a one-state solution where there would be, the Palestinians would get the right of return. What do you think would happen over there? Well, the society over there is becoming closer and closer to a theocracy, and in some respects, also the Jewish population is moving closer towards religiosity and everything. So you would end up having a civil war based on religious confessions, the same as in Lebanon. That was the idea behind Lebanon. If you want to see the results of what would happen with the left proposal, you don't have to look very far. You just have to go right across the border to Lebanon, and they've had that type of conflict for years, and it would probably be worse, by the way. Although Lebanon has been kind of a disaster, in many different forms since its formation. It was a country where the government was divided up between religious groups. That meaning, the Armenian Orthodox Church, for example, got a certain number of seats in parliament, and the Kurds did, and the Druze did, and the Sunni Muslims did, and the Maronite Catholics and the Melk. I could go on and on. So they decided, we're going to form a single state for all of these different religious groups that are traditionally part of Lebanon. Well, what ended up happening? Well, one group identifies more with Arab society, that would be the Sunni Muslims, and another group identifies more strongly with France, that would be the Catholics and the other Christians, and another group identifies more with Iran, that would be the Shiite Muslims. So you've had basically a divided society. There will be no one-state solution where all the groups can come together. So, I mean, in my opinion, I agree basically with what you said, Maddodge. If I understood you.
No. Yeah, no, and okay, so how big is the Palestinian section of Israel? Could they quell the insurrection if they went door to door?
They have before. I mean, it was the Intifada was defeated when I was still in the army. It was, and by defeated, I don't mean that there was no opposition left, but basically their effectiveness, their combat effectiveness was defeated. So, you know, I wouldn't say it was door to door across the entire West Bank, for example, but you know, the cities of the West Bank were in many cases, you know, they were cordoned off, and you know, there was door to door fighting, and needless to say, a lot of people got arrested. Some people got killed. Some people fled overseas. Some people fled to Gaza. But yes, it could it could be quelled. But part of it is the international pressure. Part of it is the relationship with the United States. Obama probably, if the Intifada had broken out under Obama, it probably would still be going on. And I think that's it for me tonight. Do you guys mind if I bow out? Because I kind of went through.
Yeah, no problem. I understand. It is starting to get a little late, so we'll probably wrap this up in the next few minutes, I assume. But thanks for stopping in, Bull. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks for listening, and thanks for all the questions.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for stopping in again. Yeah, that was a nice, good debate between you and Bull. What's that?
Huh?
Oh, I thought you said something.
I said we're gonna shut it down.
Well, we started this.
I said we're gonna shut it down.
Well, we started this about
9 o'clock.
9:30. Yeah. What I was just going to say when we were talking about the whole Israel and the two-state solution thing. One thing that I actually found out through my research that never gets talked about too was, I think it was back in the 80s. There was a coalition of Arabs that came together in Palestine, and then they created what they called the 3 no's, which was the no recognition of Israel, no negotiation with Israel, and no peace with Israel. So when we're discussing about when people bring up the two-state solution, I always use that as a rebuttal, because I find that's never taken into consideration. Yet, as we look at Hamas and Hezbollah and how they act towards Israel, it seems pretty clear that these 3 no's are still in place. They still don't have any recognition of Israel.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why I'm in favor of Israel being able to do what they want. Right now, the United States gives them so much foreign aid that we can reel them in, right? We can kind of dictate, no, don't attack Iran. No, be a little lighter on Palestine. No, that's not our place to do, in my opinion.
Fair enough. I guess it is like, the thing is, though, if there was aid to be stopped going into Israel, I wonder if they could actually sustain themselves. Because I was just when you were talking, I was looking it up, and it was something like 38 billion is going into Israel over the next 10 years. I think $38 billion in military aid to Jerusalem. That's going.
I think we should stop giving aid.
What's that?
I think we should stop giving aid to everybody. I think we should stop letting foreigners in, with some exception, maybe some work permits for people to come in, or like some visas, like we should cut tourist visas, but we should cut visas. We should concentrate on ourselves. They keep acting like there's not enough workers. And yet you have all these people out of work. We don't need these people. And you know who used to do these jobs that a lot of these jobs that they're saying no one wants to do? Teenagers and 20-somethings used to do those jobs. Like, people used to get out of college and they would, everybody worked in this, like, oh, everyone goes to college and gets a degree, and then when you get out of college, like, you think you're too. We didn't have that. Like, my father's generation, you graduated high school.
Oh, I think her connection cut out.
Oh, yeah, she was breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, that was pretty bad at the end.
Yeah, I didn't hear the beginning of your guys' stream because I was doing my own, honestly. But
you were doing the red eye, eh?
No, the red eye is tomorrow. I was doing mad streams. I just started it. I don't know. I was kind of buzzed. We got our taxes today, so I bought some beer. You know how it is.
Damn right. Yeah, now you got that tax back. You might as well. But I was actually wondering because before we got started, I was we were kind of just talking about your red eye stream. How the hell do you go for 8 hours? Because that's what I saw when I went on your page. It was like an 8-hour stream, and like, how the hell do you do that?
I did that only once, I believe, maybe twice. But it takes a lot of good panelists. That's what really keeps the red eye alive is my panel. I can't really do it solo. I rely on my panel. We bounce off of each other, and the conversation just grows. So.
I hear you on that one because a lot of that, even in this stream tonight, I found a lot of that. As soon as you jumped in, you and Bold were having a great conversation going back and forth. Yeah, definitely. I've noticed that the panel makes a big difference. If I was supposed to be the one sitting here talking most of the time, I know I'd run out of ideas pretty damn fast.
Yeah, and I think a part of that, though, is me and Bold know each other. So I'm not afraid to really come at him because we're friends. We know each other. You know what I mean? So he's not going to take offense if I come at him a little bit.
Fair enough. Well, whenever we're streaming together, feel free to do the same for me because I am going to need, I like getting my ideas challenged too, to make sure that my arguments are, strong. So feel free, whenever we're streaming, feel free to question and come at me and criticize too.
Oh, absolutely. And man, if you ever want to come on the red eye, like I've said before, hit me up, dude. We do it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday?
Yep, 3 Pacific Standard Time. I'm on the West Coast, so I believe you are too, actually. So I think we're in the same time zone, brother.
Sorry, you said you were on the West Coast?
Yeah, I live in Oregon.
Oh, no, I'm on the East Coast.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
So you're over there in like the French Canadian area, or is that the West Coast? I'm confused.
More the East Coast is more the French Canadian area, but I actually am right on the border. Like my city borders right along the French Canadian area, so there are a lot of French Canadians.
See, that's one thing. Canada doesn't have a race issue; they have a language issue, right? I mean, isn't that it's either French or you speak English, and that's where the issue grows in Canada. Or am I wrong? I watch the rebel media. Maybe I'm wrong.
We do have our own.
They actually have a huge.
Oh, analytical! I was waiting for you to say it, something, but you died.
Huge issue with the French Canadians versus the regular Canadians.
Yeah, essentially the idea with that
class on.
Oh, I'm going. Okay, sorry. I thought you were fishing. I was just saying that basically the idea with that is because there was when Canada was formed, there's a lot of France and England were fighting over it. So when the country was finally formed, Quebec wanted to keep their culture and their heritage, so they like being known as a nation within a nation. So that's caused a lot of friction between Quebec and the rest of the country. Yeah, I would say right now we don't really have too much of a race issue. Like every country does, but really it is. Yeah, you're right. It's the language barrier,
right.
And it's mostly just because a lot of the Quebecers don't want to see themselves as Canadian. They want to see themselves as different. It would be as if it would be almost as if Texans were anti-American. In a lot of the ways that's
wait.
You mean like California?
Do we need to revisit? Do we need to revisit the Civil War? we can talk about Texas.
Fair enough.
Californians who Donald Trump is not the president.
But actually, what's kind of funny too is while we're talking about we were talking about foreign aid for America doing that. But I don't know if you do in the States, but one thing that we have amongst the provinces is called an equalization program. So provinces that make more money, they're supposed to send money off to provinces that make less money, give us same standard of living. But despite the fact being very anti-Canadian and against the government and everything, Quebec actually takes the majority of those payments.
Well, you know what I would like to throw out there? Since you guys already have that program in place, I think you should get half of the Beer Barian subs because he's over here in Vancouver. You know, he's on the West Coast over by me, and you're over on the East. I mean, those subscribers should be divvied out equally, correct?
It sounds like it, yeah. Oh, gotta love that that equity, that quality of outcome, eh?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just had to.
No, it's no problem. That's exactly the same thing I've said about.
He's skeptic. Not quite political.
Sorry, I missed that, AC. I didn't quite hear you.
No, I was saying that Bearing is not really a YouTuber.
Bearing is
Bear.
Okay, just show. Well,
Like he's
I
more.
think
There's the skeptic community that get like they basically poke like JW. It's really a misnomer when people try to act like the skeptic community is political, because they really don't talk about the only thing they really talk about is like anti-SJW. They don't really speak about positive, truly conservative type ideas. They're only against the left. They're not really for the right. Like they don't want the crap of the left, but like they don't talk about, you know, like, oh, we need to preserve Second Amendment, you know, they don't, you know, when you start to talk about that, so, oh no, that's going too far. Like, and they don't really get into politics other than, you know, and their anti-SJW stuff is mostly to make fun of how ridiculous it is.
Although what's kind of funny about that is that ever since he started up doing his live stream, Andy Worski, a lot of them have started bitching against him, and he's unintentionally, he's kind of showing them how they're using the same tactics of the very people that they used to bitch about.
Yeah, I don't really even consider Worski is kind of like moved. Worski basically became alt-right, but he's not admitting it.
Well, that seems to be what all his streams are about these days. Like,
yeah, I mean, like he's actually a political YouTuber.
It's just like for him though,
he's not really like he no longer fits in the category of the other skeptics. But
no.
You know, if you look at all the other people that consider themselves skeptic, most of them, like if you look at their video titles and you start watching their videos, all they do is they're anti-SJW and pick on other YouTubers that are similar category. Like when Sargon of Akkad came out with that liberalist thing, I mean, yeah, it was kind of like, what the hell are you fucking doing, Sargon? But I would have never bothered to make a video about that. But all the skeptics had to jump in and make a video making fun of Sargon's liberalist, you know, like it was just like they can't stop picking on people. They never talk in the affirmative about what they want to happen. All they do is complain and attack.
Well, let's be real. Andy,
attack the SJWs. I can understand W's are ridiculous and conservatives. Lump them in the category with us, but if you stop and look at it, if you really stop and look at their videos, and I don't put Worski's recent videos, but if you really stop and look at their videos, people are not videos to SJW videos. You have no idea, you know, they're pro-conservative anything. They're not really talking about. Andy's just doing this because it gets clicks, thoh.
Yeah, well, let's be real. Andy,
but the truth is, the people he's bringing on, he had it at this point. But I mean, the other to this, just like I'll get on a line about another, get on around and complain about a feminist.
Well, no. See, Andy Worski did that stream with Sargon and Richard
I
Spencer.
heard let's
He made 20. Wait a minute though. He made $20,000.
right.
All right. I've never made $20,000 on my YouTube channel. I'm betting
Right.
neither have you guys.
Right.
Wouldn't you repeat the process
Right.
if you made 20 grand
Nope,
in 3
nope, definitely
hours?
not. I mean, I know he shared some of it with the people that, yeah. I mean, he, you know, he, and I think he's still making good money. I know somebody commented they were aggravated that he reads all the super chats after the live stream, and I think that's a fair point. Because people like do the super chats, they want to like influence the discussion, and I think that's a fair point. Like they should take a break. They should have somebody like sorting the super chats and like one person can like go and have their bathroom break and the other guest can like answer super chats that are like meant for them, and then like, you know, and then that they can come back and then like, but anyway.
Well, yeah, if somebody donates, I was watching that first Sargon and Spencer debate. Somebody donated $100. Yeah, they had a Nazi flag as their emblem. Okay, whatever. But their message should be said. They donated $100 fucking dollars, and they did it repeatedly. I mean, come on now.
I mean, it's mostly because so many, like the regular chat moves so fast you can't really even read it. And the super chats, even them, like they get overwhelmed with super chats. And so like instead of breaking up the debates, then the guests go and then they read the super chats. Like people mean for the super chats to go to the guests. I don't know, maybe there would be to like have the break and then read the super chat, you know, because the point is that like some of it is garbage. Like if did it either of you see the recent one with Halsey and Mike Enoch?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, neither have I.
So being Jewish, I ended up watching that one because it was a debate about the JQ, and I actually thought that Halsey did a really good job. But if you look, like all the comments were all these alt-right people, like, you know, no matter what you tell these people on the alt-right, they don't want to listen. Like it was like gas the kikes, gas the Jews. Like that's what most of the comments were, even the super chats. And when they got to the, you know, when they excused the debaters and they read the super chats, a lot of them, they were like, okay, I'm not going to read that one, because the super chats were saying things like gas the kites.
So I mean, what? Like, you have to read them.
Gas the ADL, which I thought was a little funny because I'm right wing.
Well, I hate the ADL.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm Jewish, but I hate the ADL. I don't feel like they represent me. So, like, that was a little bit funny because, like, here's the thing is even right-wing Jews can't stand the ADL. Like, right-wing Jews, and they always conflate liking Israel with things that left-wing Jews do, which is really weird because left-wing Jews really don't give a crap about Israel. And right-wing Jews that actually care about Israel are also the ones, you know, voting for immigration to be buttoned up in the United States. So, you know, and then they turn around and they try to conflate them. They try to say, like, well, Jews do this. And then they talk about left-wing stuff. And then they say, like, well, why should we, like, be nice to right-wing Jews? And also, Mike Enoch he basically tried to say that all right-wing Jews are, like, neocon types, and I don't know anybody who's a neocon. I mean, everybody I know is pro-Israel, but they want immigration locked up in the United States. Like, I remember was probably like 8 to 10 years ago, somebody went on a rant on Facebook and she's like, I'm sick of pressing 1 for English or pressing 2 for English. I'm sick of seeing all these Spanish ads on the subway. Da, 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 da. And then, you know, and this was a Jewish person. Not only that, but everybody pretty much chimed in and said, no, don't be sorry for your rant. I agree with you. Like, nobody lashed out at her. Like, all of her Facebook friends were Jewish and everybody pretty much supported her. Like, they were like, yeah, I agree. Like, when Jews came to the United States, most of the people I know, like their parents or their grandparents came and they had to be sponsored and they had to like not be on welfare, you know. And the thing is, you know, immigration was different at that time. You know, it's insane that we basically like bring people in here and put them immediately on welfare. Like, what? I mean, like, you know, unless you're like stupid, if you think about that, like, you know, if you have any kind of logic, like, you're sitting there like, we bring people in who weren't born here, have no loyalties to here, who have no interest in actually being a part of our society. We bring these people in and then we put them on the dole. Like, I can, you know, I can be okay with American citizens being on the dole. You know, I'm not thrilled with it. But, like, if people are born here and, you know, they hit hard times or, like,
well, so
you know,
if I understand you correctly,
they just don't have what it takes to compete in this world, like, against them being on our welfare, but take care of the whole. Erically, I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, if I understand you correctly, then you're okay with the safety net for citizens. But how dare you come over illegally?
It's constitutional and stuff, and it's not really right wing, but it's like, at least those are our own citizens. But when it comes down to like giving those welfare programs to people who were not born here, who, you know, I mean, it used to be that you had to be here a certain number of years before applying for citizenship. And like, you know, people were expected to not become citizens and immediately go on the dole. You know, and in other countries, this is still the case. Like, you know, if you look at like Asian countries and stuff, like you can't just go there and like get on their welfare. Like, they don't let people do that. Other countries don't, you know, some countries don't even take care of their own citizens.
Well, that's fair. I agree with you for the most part. But if you look at immigration in the United States, they came into New York and then they settled in the 5 Points. And I'm talking mainly about the Irish immigrants. And they joined gangs and there was massive crime. But sooner or later, after 1 or 2 generations, they moved on from that and they integrated into society. So, I mean, every new generation that immigrates to a certain country is going to have issues. I'm not saying let the refugees in and let them rape our fucking little girls, all right? I have 3 girls. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is we are a nation built on immigrants, and we are a nation built on immigration. That is why I'm in favor of an extensive background check, but more or less an Ellis Island style immigration. I don't think it should take 10 years to be an American citizen. I really don't.
How do you background check these people? They come from nations that are basically at war with us, that don't have a proper infrastructure. How do you background check them?
Then you send them back. You don't let them in. That's
exactly.
How. If you can't verify their history, if you can't verify who they are or where they've been, then you send them back. That's the point of a background check, is it not?
I mean, well, and this is why Trump said we don't want to take people in from certain countries. These are countries where, like, ISIS had taken over, like, the passport office. So they could just print passports for ISIS fighters. And Trump said we shouldn't let those people into the United States, and everybody said he was a fucking cold hard bastard. And I'm like,
Not I.
how do you background check these people? These are not people who want to come here. I mean, and this is another thing, like, if you're going to have, I don't see why we're giving welfare to non-citizens, you know?
Nor do I. Like, I agree with you on most points. I just believe we should have a more open immigration policy. I don't believe you should be on a waiting list for 10 years if you're a British citizen and you want to immigrate to the United States. I believe that is ridiculous.
But more open how? Like, we can't let everybody in. I mean, like, how many people should we let in? I mean, we're already letting in, like, millions of people a year. Or like 1 million a year. I mean, like, how many people should we let in? Like, why should everybody who wants to come here get to come here? You know, I mean, people who are here who went through a background check, I don't think we should kick them out. Like, anybody who came legally, who came through the process legally, I don't think we should. But I think we should stop doing that.
Well, so my good friend MC, he's an ex-NSA agent. He was in military intelligence. He's a regular on the Red Eye stream. Not to plug my own stuff. Sorry, opinion there. I'm not trying to do that. But yeah, but he is a regular on the Red Eye stream, and he believes that we should shut down the borders for 10 years. We should let the people that are here immigrate in and disperse into society, and then maybe open up the borders again. I disagree, but what say you guys?
Well, I think I could be wrong, but I think this was the immigration system used in the past, where you would allow a group of them to come in, then you close down the borders. I think actually this may. Personally, I think this maybe not 10 years. I'm not sure. But if you were to do an immigration system like this, I think this would be the best way for immigration in order to get them to integrate. As it stands, though, when we're on the immigration debate, I'm not a closed borders type of guy, but I do think as it stands, we do have a little more into like we have too much immigration these days, and because of it, they're not integrating. So I think at least when we're going along this 10-year plan, I think it is something that should be looked at.
The idea behind open borders is that basically anybody who wants to come in can move in, like, to the extent that, like, you can move from province to province and you don't need anybody's permission. Or like within the United States, we can move from state to state. We don't need anybody's permission. We have open our states, but we don't have open borders with other countries. And I don't think we should have open borders with other countries.
Well, to be fair, up until a few years ago, there was pretty much an open border with Canada.
I mean,
yeah,
but
I'm just throwing out there. I'm just throwing out their opinion.
I mean,
we had an open border policy with Canada.
True. I'll address that in a second if you want to go, AC. No?
I mean, not really, because you couldn't move to Canada or work in Canada with. Yeah, you couldn't just work in Canada or be. If you were Canadian, you couldn't just work in the US, and if you couldn't just work in Canada. You had to get like a special work permit to work in, a foreign
AC, you realize there are border cities where the border.
And I had a work permit.
Well, you do realize that the border in some of these northern
club
cities is literally a white paint line,
like Niagara Falls area, and I lived in the.
Okay, but there's some cities where literally the border is a white line on the road that says Canada this way and the United States this way. All right, that is an open border. Literally, it's an open border.
Well, that one actually is a fault more from our end, even I'll say, because we have the longest undefended border in the world. And you said
right, but you still like not a Canadian. Like, okay, when you go in to get a job.
I think you cut out there.
Yeah, she's been breaking up on my end for a while. I didn't know if it was just me or not. I have shitty internet. We got a foot of snow outside. I'm in the Cascades, so how do I know?
Yeah, but I mean, like, if to work in the United States, citizen wants to work in Canada, like, you know how when you have to give them like either your passport or like your driver's license and your birth.
Oh, she dropped. Oh, well, that's a shame.
Well, I'm still here. So, what say you when it comes to the border between the United States and Canada? Because, as I said, there are places where it's a completely open border. I'm sorry, but it is. There's literally lines on the street that says Canada and United States. And you could take pictures, you know, people take selfies straddling the border. I mean, come on, man.
Oh, like definitely. It does seem to be a much more open border concept between Canada and America. And even if it's not quite to the extent where AC is talking about, where it's like an actual open border, at least there's enough lax laws in between our two countries that it might as well be like like a Canadian going in America won't be given much problems. In terms of that, one, I think the reasons we have it that way is because our cultures are a lot alike, and also we're strong allies with each other. But even when we're discussing the open border concept, if you remember earlier this year, Trump took away the temporary protective status of the El Salvadorians and the Haitians. And when that happened, we actually had a bunch of people that were fleeing from America, and they were coming into Canada in droves. And we didn't have anywhere to put them. They were actually living in a tent city just along the border. And ever since then, because we don't really have places to put them, we're kind of stuck, looking after them. We got to finance them. When winter came, we were forced to build some, we had to build winter cabins for them in that area because people were still crossing, but now tents were no longer good. So, so when we're talking about that's sort of why I saw the problem was that we were just having a bunch of people that were crossing over the border where nothing was being done. And we literally had our police officers acting as valets for them, as for the people that were coming over, like carrying their luggage. So we do have more of an open border concept. But again, it's a little bit different, I think, when we're talking about Americans and Canadians and where we're talking about people from different cultures, just because people from different cultures can hold a lot of different views from us. So that's something that should be taken into consideration when we're talking about open borders.
Fair enough. I would argue that Americans and Canadians have vastly different points of view when it comes to gun control. The American Constitution, you guys don't follow that. You're more of an English. Yeah, you're more of an English colony still, kinda. I don't know. You recognize the Queen, but you don't. It's kind of weird. What's up with that, actually? I gotta ask that.
So that has more really to do with tradition, I would say. So so Canada, there's a great joke that says that Canada was the only country that ever got its independence because we asked nicely. And that's kind of true. That is kind of how it worked out. After I think it was World War II, I believe, is when we started gaining more independence. And then by 1982 is when we gained full independence from Britain. But we worked on their parliamentary system, and most of the way we conduct our politics is through the British system. So keeping the Queen as our monarchy was sort of a bit of a traditional thing more than anything else. I'm actually not in favor of that. That's where I differ from a lot of Canadian conservatives, is I actually want to do away with the monarchy as head of our government, because it's pretty useless, I would say. It's mostly just about tradition and following the British system and paying respect to the Queen of England, being part of the Confederation.
Well, yeah, it's a figurehead that you just bow to. and that doesn't make sense to me as an American. I don't get it.
I don't like it either. Just for that reason, is because whether or not our history comes from England, and even if we still have strong British ties and work on their Westminster system, the Queen is still a foreign person to us. Like most Canadians have no attachment to the Queen. So yeah, really, again, that's something I'd like to do away with. But as it stands, a lot of traditional conservatives in Canada still prefer the Westminster system with the Queen as head of government.
As a Canadian, how do you feel about Rebel Media? I stopped watching them after they fired a lot of their good commentators, and Gavin left. I stopped watching. But how do you feel about them?
I find that I kind of am in the same boat as you. I kind of watched them up until they fired everybody, and then Gavin McGuinness left as well. And I wasn't crazy about the new people they brought in. I don't always like the stuff that they talk about or they push. I think they can be a little extreme sometimes, but all in all, I think they're necessary considering the state of the media in Canada, especially because a lot of it is government funded and controlled. So they actually are I would say they are necessary in this day and age for our news, even if they can be a little extreme from time to times.
Yeah, we need to get all the YouTubers that are Canadian. We need to get all you guys to like work together and like create some sort of a network so that like there's something else besides them in Canada for people to turn to. Similar to what we've formed, but for just Canadians. Like maybe eventually we can develop that.
I was kind of hoping to do that too, because actually you were my inspiration, AC, because I know you saw my Twitter account. I just posted up that I started up a Discord account for Canadian politics. And that was kind of you were my inspiration for that. I just wasn't sure if that was going to be something that you were interested in doing on your server, if that was something you were interested in, because I figured most of it, what you wanted to do was focus on American politics and what was going on.
The only problem with that is I'm trying to keep our server specifically for like libertarian and conservatives. We have one alt-right, as long as he doesn't like start like, freaking out about the Jews, like either on a podcast, a group cast with one of us or like on our server. I don't really care. Like I see it on his Minds account, so I know that like that's part of his mindset. But he doesn't stick it in our face when he's with us, so I don't care. But yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why I suggested Crazy Hair, she considers herself a leftist, although she seems pretty tame to me for a leftist. So she may be on her way over to the right, but she does. You should actually contact her. Well, I set you up with her server. You should actually contact her. She does a series called Left versus Right, and I was on it. So, like, she looks at your channel and then, like, she interviews you and talks about a few things that she sees as recurring themes on your channel.
Okay. I think I know which one you're talking about. I think you sent me the link, eh? It's like the girl who's flipping you off in the thumbnail there or something?
Yes, that's her.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I'll send her a message sometime. Yeah, I'll send her a message sometime, and I'll see if whether she brings me on or I have her on. I think that'd be good. Yeah, no, I'll check it out for sure.
Yeah, she has you can check out her channel. You can watch I should link you the video that I was on. She also I found out about the series because another Jewish YouTuber was on her Left versus Right series. But he's like a skeptic. He's not really a conservative. He doesn't really talk about politics. So that's why I didn't like invite him on our server, because I don't like the way the skeptics sit there and call themselves political YouTubers. But like I said, I mean, he's not technically, the skeptic community started as an atheist community. But when people stopped talking about atheism on YouTube, it kind of devolved into this, like, first it was let's pick on the SJWs, and now they just pick on any other YouTuber. And, they don't really talk about politics. Like, like I said, when Sargon said he was going to do his liberalist movement, everybody had to jump in and like, oh, I got to make a video picking on Sargon. You know, and it's just like, at what point, like, you get to the, you know, you subscribe to these people and you get to the point where you're like, I don't want to watch another video of them picking on another YouTuber. Like,
wait, is it really picking on? No, but is it really picking on? Because I'm a libertarian, all right, and I'm probably the most libertarian person you'll really speak to. I'm more libertarian than Piper Report. Don't let him fool you. I mean, seriously, a nuke in every house. I don't give a shit.
Piper Report, by the way. I don't know if you know that, but I found you from him. I think I actually contacted you, and then you guys invited like other people on, like 40 and stuff. But I found him. I don't know how, and then he had mentioned he was like going on a channel to chat. And so I invited him, and then, like, I noticed that he did that on his channel. And so I went and I opened up one of the Google Hangouts type chats on his channel. I was like, you, Coffee with Comment, and 40. So I found you and contacted you from that.
Well, yeah, and like I'm like, hey, you want to ban bump stocks? Suck my cock. All right, that's my stance. Fuck off.
I mean, bump stocks are retarded, but it's a slippery slope, so I don't like it.
That is my stance.
I don't even own guns, but I'm pro Second Amendment. I believe that citizens need to have guns, and I understand why that was put into the Constitution. It says very clearly, necessary to secure a free state. We've been losing our freedoms.
Well, you know, and that's something I really get irritated with. Have you ever watched the HBO series John Adams?
No.
All right. Well, words have meanings, okay? Words mean something. There is a definition of a word, and the right to bear arms means you have the right from your God, your creator, or yourself, however you believe. I was raised Catholic. I am now more atheist. My kids go to church. I want them to make their own decision. But the fact remains that the right is inherent to me. The government has no right to take that. That includes bump stocks. That includes hellfire triggers. That includes a silencer. Fuck you. I could use a 2-liter bottle for a silencer.
Not even a
or
silencer.
a potato.
I mean that's such a misnomer too. To call it a silencer is huge. It's a huge misnomer, and the people that are saying this stuff, I mean, like, I think they've only seen guns on movies where, like, they put a silencer on and all of a sudden the gun is going pew, 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 you know, instead of, like, actually shooting. And, like, that's not how it works. Like, all they need to do is go on YouTube, you know, and Google, like, silencer or, you know, gun suppressor, and they can see people shooting guns with a suppressor on, and it makes it a little bit quieter, but I think we still need earplugs even.
Everybody that I've seen doing videos of them shooting, they always had ear protection on for that reason. Actually, best one I ever saw, some guy used a silencer and a shotgun, and then the caption after was, heard 4 towns over instead of 5. Like, a silencer, like in the Hollywood, is really overblown the silencers in the movies. Yeah.
Yeah, and in the movies, like, you know, and on TV, like, they make it so that, like, you shoot the gun and, like, the sound becomes pew 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 instead of, like, an actual gun sound. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous.
They'll show someone shooting someone from 15 feet away, and guy number 2 doesn't even hear it.
Well, no,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you guys, I tried to ask this on my show, but they all think like I do, so you guys think a little bit differently. Now, will banning bump stocks actually change anything? How would you fix the mass shooting problem in America? Me, myself, I would arm the teachers. That would stop school shootings. Not mass shootings on a whole, because you can never do that. And you can never stop all school shootings either. I mean, we are human beings, and bad people will do what bad people do. Or as I said earlier today on my channel, crazy people do what crazy people do.
Well, in terms of that, I think, definitely either arming the teachers or maybe having armed security guards on schools could be a good option. Excuse me. Also, looking more into, I'd like to see more research into mental health in this regards, because that seems to always be the thing when it comes to these shooters. Is it's always somebody who's suffering from some sort of mental health, but yet there's very little research that's done into it. So I think more research into mental health will be actually the big factor in ending a lot of these mass shootings we see.
Okay, you brought up mental health. All right. So do you want health records released? Do you want the doctor-patient confidentiality breached? Is that your contention?
That's a good question on that, because then we're definitely breaching a form of privacy. So that is something that needs to be taken in consideration. All in all, I would have to say no, because in principle, even though it's something I could see as maybe being beneficial, I could see it being abused more than being useful. So I would have to say no. I wouldn't want to see a break in doctor patient confidentiality, but at least some research of some sort into the mental health disease may be able to do something. I know I'm maybe not giving the best answer right now, but
no, and absolutely, I agree with you, and I'm glad you said that, because I like you. And if you said, yeah, fuck doctor-patient confidentiality, we might have an issue.
Well, there's definitely some things that I will go against and disagree with on principle, even if I think it might be a more practical reason. So, for example, it may seem like banning guns would be the solution to it, but we all know that banning guns isn't going to stop anything. So even if I thought, I don't think that banning guns is the solution, and I don't want to ban on guns, but even if I thought that banning on guns was the solution, the Second Amendment right would actually stop me from willing to say, yes, put a ban on guns, because the right is there in place. So even if I disagreed, I'd still say that guns should still be allowed and should still be under the Second Amendment, should be defended.
Absolutely. And AC, you wrote some good stuff in the side chat. You want to bring that up live?
Yeah. I don't know if Just My wants that on his channel. By the way, I thought I'd put this graphic up again because it's fitting. So, this is a very, a political cartoon, basically a meme. And it says it all. And this is part of the problem. The laws that we have are not being enforced. I mean, they keep saying more gun control, but, the gun control we have is not being enforced. So why do we need new laws? So, I mean, I would bring up that. And then, the reason why is, the stuff that I put in the side chat.
Well, no, and also, I would elaborate on that. You can't enforce the laws you have. How are you going to make stricter laws on law-abiding citizens? Okay, the people shooting up schools are not the ones that are following the laws. Can we agree on that?
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, come on now.
Yeah, exactly. And that's always been the counter argument, is they say, well, it's going to stop them from doing the school shooting. You ban guns. No, it won't. When the black market is for guns is just as active as it is today, it's so easy to get a gun. You just need to go into a certain neighborhood, talk to the right person, or talk to a certain buddy who knows the right person. It's actually extremely easy to get a gun if you wanted to illegally.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, there's other memes that go around, banning guns! Yeah, that worked so well for banning drugs, and banning this, and banning that.
Hell, in Gun Control Canada, I have been offered a gun. People have told me full out, if you need a gun, I can get you a gun. I've never needed one, so I've never taken them up on it. But it's that's how easy it is. Even in
Lies.
the country.
Lies. You have a whole closet full of guns. Come on now.
Plenty of illegal ones, you know it. All
Yeah,
right.
you got that. You got that scary AK-47. You know.
I'm that guy you should be watching out for. You never know what I'll do.
Well, that beard just says it all, dude. You're a jihadist, right?
The whitest
Well,
jihadist that ever
it's
existed.
Canadians, jihadi Justin, you know.
Yeah, that's about as accurate as it could fucking be. Jihadi
Well,
Justin is right.
Let's
you get
give
to-
$11 million to a jihadi. Let's take the money from our taxpayers and give it to a jihadi. Like what?
And then let's look our veterans in the eye, who like a veteran who's lost a leg in combat, and tell him, you're asking for way too fucking much, buddy.
Exactly.
You know, I have a serious question though.
Go ahead.
All right. So, do all Canadian men have beards? Is it just because it's so cold up there? I have a goatee and I grow my beard out when my wife will let me. But I live in the Pacific Northwest, so yeah, it's cold here too. But do all you Canadians have beards? I see the beard burying. You got a good beard. It's like you guys got the beard game going on.
Not everybody, but actually, yes, a significant portion of us, and they definitely get bigger during wintertime. I mean, I definitely grow mine out more during wintertime. It's actually a good insulator. So, yeah, actually, we have a significant amount of Canadians that like it. More in the rural areas, though. If you go in the cities, not as much, unless you're, like, actually looking at, like, hipsters, you know?
Oh,
Now,
like
as a
Portlandia.
woman, I don't have a problem with a man who has like a beard or a goatee. As long as it's not like a scraggly beard. I don't like the scraggly beards, like the rabbi beards. No, but like a normal deep beard or like a goatee.
Yeah, I'll be honest. My wife is cool with the mustache and goatee, but when I start growing the beard out, she fucks with me. So,
Just tell him it's like all the cool guys are doing. Tell him all the real men grow up beards.
that's right. I gotta be like the beard bearing. No.
Alrighty. I think I'm going to call it a night, though. It's about 1:45
Yeah.
right now.
Yes, it is 1:45.
Alrighty. Well, it was great talking to you two. This was a great conversation. Thanks for coming on.
Yes.
And Mad Libertarian, I will definitely be messaging you soon to join you on the Red Eye stream.
Yeah, dude. You're welcome anytime, man. Do that. Thank you for having me on.
Hey, no problem. This was awesome. Well, I'd like to have both you back on again soon.
Okay.
Alrighty. Take care. Have a good evening, you two.